Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
You know, some of the most revolutionary ideas out there, they don't get cooked up in fancy boardrooms or high-tech labs. Nope, they're often born from moments of absolute crisis. And that is exactly where our story begins today. I want you to cast your mind back to 2008. The slide really says it all, doesn't it? Lehman Brothers collapses, the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. I mean, this wasn't just some headline. This was a moment of pure global financial chaos. Trust in the entire traditional banking system, the very bedrock of our economy, was just crumbling. So right in the middle of all this fear and uncertainty, this radical question started to bubble up. What if there was another way? What if we could have a financial system that didn't depend on these giant and clearly failing institutions? A system that no single person or government could control or mess with. And then, something pretty remarkable happened. Less than 2 months after that Lehman Brothers collapse, while the world was still just trying to figure out what hit it, a paper was quietly posted to an online cryptography forum. Think of it like a message board for total geeks who are experts in secure communication. It proposed a completely new way of thinking about money, and at first, almost nobody even noticed. And that leads us right to the total enigma at the heart of this entire revolution: the inventor. An individual, or maybe a whole group of people, known only by a pseudonym. So this paper laid out the whole blueprint for a new kind of electronic money. It described a peer-to-peer system, which really just means person-to-person. It would let you send payments directly to someone else online, completely cutting out the middleman, the bank or the credit card company. This was the birth of Bitcoin. But who was Satoshi Nakamoto? A man? A woman? A whole team of developers? The crazy part is, to this day, we still have absolutely no idea. After launching this world-changing project, they just vanished. Poof, gone. And that anonymity has become a crucial part of the whole legend. Okay, now this is the part where almost everyone gets a little bit tripped up, so let's take a second and clarify the single most common point of confusion. What in the world is the difference between Bitcoin and the blockchain?
This slide here lays it out perfectly. Think of it like this. Blockchain is the revolutionary new operating system, like iOS or Windows. And Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin was just the very first app built to run on it. So while Bitcoin gets all the headlines, the real game changer, the true legacy, is the blockchain technology underneath it all.
So how does this whole blockchain thing even work? Well, its big innovation is something called a distributed ledger. Instead of a bank keeping one central private record book of all the transactions, the blockchain is a public record that's copied and shared across thousands of computers all over the world. It's completely decentralized. It has no boss, no CEO, and no single point of failure. All right, so if there's no central bank just printing money, where do new Bitcoins even come from? Well, they have to be mined, and that brings us to the people who actually maintain and secure this entire network. Miners are basically the accountants, the record keepers for the whole network. They use these super powerful computers to solve really complex math puzzles. When they solve one, they get to gather up all the recent transactions, validate them, and then seal them into a permanent, unchangeable block. Now, the comparison to gold mining is totally intentional. For doing all this crucial work of keeping the network secure, they get rewarded with brand new Bitcoin. It's how new value is literally unearthed and brought into the system. And this timeline shows one of Bitcoin's most amazing features: built-in scarcity. You see, unlike regular currencies that governments can print more and more of, this system was programmed from day one to have a very limited supply. The reward that miners get gets cut in half about every 4 years. It's an event called the halving. This process keeps going until around the year 2140, when the very last Bitcoin will be mined. After that, no more. The total supply will be capped, forever, at just 21 million.
So at this point, you're probably wondering what I was wondering. What about security? I mean, if this is all just digital code, what's to stop someone from hacking the whole thing or just creating fake money?
It's the most logical question in the world, right? We hear about giant banks and even governments getting hacked all the time. So how could a system with no central authority, no corporate firewalls, and no security team possibly be safe? Well, here's the crazy part. Its security actually comes from the fact that it's decentralized. With a normal bank, hackers have one single target to attack, but the blockchain is like a moving target spread all over the globe. To change even a single transaction, a hacker would need to somehow compromise millions of computers, all at the exact same time. And the result? Since it was created back in 2009, the Bitcoin network has never been compromised. Not once. Ever.
To put that into perspective, here's a great way to think about it. Hacking the blockchain would be like trying to sneak into millions of libraries all around the world, find the exact same book in every single one, rewrite one sentence inside, and do it all at once, so fast that none of the librarians notice. It's pretty much impossible. It's really important to keep all this in perspective, though. As this quote suggests, we are probably in the very early days of this technology. Think about the internet back in, say, 1994. A lot of people just dismissed it as a fad, a toy for nerds. They just couldn't see how it would eventually reshape, well, everything. We are very likely at that same point today with blockchain.
And that's really the key thing to take away from all this. Bitcoin, born out of that 2008 financial crisis, was the first step. It was the proof that this could work. But the real revolution is that underlying blockchain technology. It's not just about money anymore. It's a whole new way to build systems of trust that could fundamentally change, well, pretty much everything, from finance and gaming to how we track products around the world. When you think about it, the history of money is just a long story of evolution. We went from shells and rocks to shiny metals to paper notes, and then to just digital blips on a bank's computer server. And now we have code. It really leaves us with a fascinating question to chew on, doesn't it? What's the next step in the evolution of value?
Okay, let's be honest for a second. Have you ever been in a conversation about crypto, just kind of nodding along while secretly thinking, wait, are Bitcoin and blockchain the same thing? Don't worry, you are definitely not alone. So let's finally clear this up. You hear this all the time, right? Maybe you've even said it yourself. Bitcoin is blockchain. It kind of makes sense, it's simple, it rolls off the tongue. But what if I told you that saying that is like saying that email is the internet? Yeah, it's not just a little bit off, it's completely, fundamentally wrong. And understanding why is not just about winning an argument. It's about really getting the key to a technology that might just change, well, pretty much everything. So let's peel back the layers. Right, so at the absolute heart of all this confusion is a classic mix-up. It's about mistaking the very first and most famous application for the incredible technology that it was built on top of. Let's untangle that right now. Okay, think of it this way. We all use email, right? Email is this amazing application that runs on the internet, but you'd never say email is the internet. Of course not. It's the exact same thing here. Bitcoin is just the first killer app that showed the world what was possible on this massive underlying infrastructure called the blockchain. So why does everybody get this confused? It's pretty simple, actually. Bitcoin was the trailblazer. It was the first time anybody saw what this blockchain thing could actually do. And it got so famous so fast that the two names just got welded together in people's minds. But that's like only ever talking about the very first website and just ignoring the rest of the internet. Okay, so if Bitcoin is just the tip of the iceberg, then what is this massive hidden thing called the blockchain underneath it all? Let's dive in and look at what makes this technology so incredibly powerful. At its core, a blockchain is basically a new type of database. But I want you to forget about some boring spreadsheet on a server somewhere. Instead, imagine a magic notebook. And this magic notebook exists in thousands of places, on thousands of computers, all at the same time. No one person, no single company, no government owns it or controls it. That's what we mean by decentralized. And that's what makes it practically unstoppable. So here's how that magic notebook actually works. About every 10 minutes, a new page of transactions, what we call a block, is created. This new page is then cryptographically sealed to the page before it, creating a chain of blocks. Now, here's the genius part. The moment that new longer chain is made, it's instantly copied and sent out to every single computer on the network. Everybody's notebook gets updated at the exact same time with the exact same information. And what's the result of all that? You get what's called a single source of truth. Because every block is permanently linked together and the whole chain is copied everywhere, you literally can't go back and secretly change something. It's totally transparent for anyone to see. It's unstoppable because it lives everywhere at once. And it's super efficient because you don't need any middlemen. It's a system built on pure, undeniable mathematical trust. Now, if you want to understand where blockchain is in its journey, I think the best way to do it is to look back at the early days of another technology that changed the world, the internet.
So let's hop in a time machine and go back to, say, 1995. The internet was this weird, clunky thing that most people just wrote off as nonsense, a toy for nerds. All the skepticism and all the doubt that we hear about blockchain today, it was all being thrown at the internet back then.
I mean, the parallels are they're striking. Back in the 90s, people called the internet a dumb idea. You'd sit there and wait 20 minutes for a single picture to load. Powerful experts laughed at it. Does any of that sound familiar? Well, that's exactly where blockchain is today. It's a little slow, there aren't a ton of easy-to-use apps yet, and a lot of big organizations are skeptical. But here's the thing about these big, foundational technologies. They don't stay slow and clunky forever. The internet didn't. It grew exponentially. It got faster and bigger and woven into our lives in ways that nobody in 1995 could have possibly dreamed of. And blockchain is on that exact same path. So why does any of this matter to you? Why should you care? Because we are not just talking about a new kind of money here. We are talking about a fundamental shift in how we, as a society, agree on what is true. And please, don't think this is some science fiction fantasy. The Bitcoin blockchain, the very first one, has been up and running without a single hiccup, without being hacked since 2008. For well over a decade, it has been flawlessly securing trillions of dollars of value, all without a single banker or CEO in charge. This really is the key takeaway. Blockchain's power isn't just about finance. Just imagine for a second a voting system that is impossible to tamper with, or a supply chain where you can trace your food from the farm all the way to your plate with 100% certainty. That's the kind of potential we're talking about. It is a tool that can fix problems of trust in almost any industry you can think of.
So I'll just leave you with this one thought. The internet created a revolution in information. It changed how we all connect and share knowledge. But now, imagine a revolution in agreement. What happens when we have a global technology that provides a single, unchangeable, trustworthy source of truth? What will that change? My guess is absolutely everything.
All right, let's talk about money, because today we're going to dive into its fascinating story. And what's so wild is that there's this pattern, right? Every single time a new kind of currency shows up, from metal coins to digital code, it has seemed completely crazy at first. Look, this is the question so many of us are asking. Bitcoin, crypto, why even bother? We've got cash, we've got cards, we've got apps that work just fine. So when you hear about all this new complicated stuff, it's totally natural to think, what's the point?
And here's the thing, the whole point of this explainer, that feeling you have, that skepticism, that little bit of confusion, it is not new at all. In fact, it's a historical pattern that just keeps repeating. If you want to understand what's happening today with crypto, you have to see that we've been here before, many times.
So let's start right here in our current moment of confusion. You could call it the era of funny money, which is what a lot of people think of when they hear about Bitcoin. This is the part of the story that feels so strange to so many of us right now. Think back to 2008. The whole global financial system is in crisis. And out of nowhere, this new thing called Bitcoin just appears. And it was weird. I mean, really weird. It wasn't made by a government or a bank. It was created by some anonymous person or group using this brand new tech nobody had heard of called blockchain. So yeah, its purpose wasn't exactly clear and most people just ignored it.
But what if this isn't just some random, strange invention? What if it's actually the next logical step in a journey that started thousands of years ago? To really get it, we've got to go back, way back.
To see the pattern, we have to rewind the clock. And our story doesn't start with coins or cash. Nope, it starts with the very first revolution in how we think about value. And it was tied to the most basic human need of all, just surviving.
For a really long time, food was money. A bushel of wheat, a cow, that had real, tangible value. But food has one giant, inescapable flaw. It rots. I mean, can you imagine? Your entire net worth could literally spoil and just disappear in a few days. It was a terrible way to store wealth over time.
So yeah, the problem was pretty clear. We needed a new way to hold on to value. Something that wouldn't spoil, something you could trade for food or, whatever you needed, whenever you needed it.
And the answer they came up with? It was brilliant. Shiny metals. Things like gold and silver. They don't decay, they're pretty rare, and you could trade them for anything.
This was a truly revolutionary idea. But here it is. This is the first time our pattern shows up. Because as great as this idea was, most people did not trust it at first. I mean, their thinking was pretty practical. Why would I trade a basket of food that I can actually eat for some shiny, useless rock? It took a long time for people to accept it. Sound familiar? Okay, let's fast forward to the next huge leap in our story. This is the age of abstraction, where money stops being something you can hold and becomes something you're just promised. You see, as economies got bigger and more complex, even precious metals started to hold things back. You can only grow your economy as fast as you can dig shiny rocks out of the ground. The solution? Paper money. A central authority like a government could just print it when needed. It gave them way more control and flexibility. And what was the reaction? You guessed it. People thought it was ridiculous. They were like, wait, why is this flimsy piece of paper worth the same as a gold coin? It's not rare, it's not even shiny, it's just paper. It was a promise, not a physical thing, and for a lot of people, that was a really hard idea to wrap their heads around. And then, things started moving fast, really fast. In 1973, the SWIFT network came along, letting banks securely wire money all over the world. Then in the 80s and 90s, plastic credit and debit cards became a thing, which was a pretty scary idea for a lot of people back then. And by the 2000s, you had systems like PayPal, making it safe to send money over the internet to people you've never even met. So the reaction to all this digital stuff? Well, for most people, it felt completely alien. The idea that your life savings were just numbers on a screen, zipping around the world through cables, it felt so insecure, so untrustworthy. A lot of people were convinced it would just never work. And yet, today, we can barely imagine life without it.
So, after that little trip through history, let's bring it all the way back around. It's time to see what this repeating pattern can tell us about what's coming next for money, starting right now.
Now, when we go back and look at the introduction of Bitcoin in 2008, it suddenly doesn't seem so random anymore, does it? When you see it through this historical lens, it looks less like some weird anomaly, and a lot more like the next logical step in a very, very long progression.
This really lays out the entire journey perfectly. We started with the tangible value of food, stuff you can actually eat. Then we moved to the symbolic value of metal. From there, we took a leap of faith to the promissory value of paper money. And now, we're at the networked value of digital currency, where value is verified not by a bank, but by a global computer system. Every single step is a move further away from the physical world.
And you have to understand, this isn't just about Bitcoin. Get this, as of late 2020, there were more than 7,600 different digital currencies out there. This isn't some small experiment happening in a corner. It's a massive, global shift in how we think about finance.
So the really crucial takeaway here is this. When you look back, you realize the physical form of our money has just been shrinking and shrinking. We went from a heavy gold bar to a light piece of paper to a thin plastic card, and now it's becoming completely virtual, existing only as data on networks all over the world.
Ultimately, the story of money has always been a story about shared belief. We went from believing in the value of food we could eat to believing in the value of a piece of paper that a government printed. So the real question history leaves us with is this: what's the next big idea we're all going to decide to believe in?
Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to demystify one of the most talked about and, let's be honest, misunderstood topics of our time, Bitcoin. We're going to cut through all the noise and get to what it's really all about. Okay, let's just dive right in and tackle the biggest question head on. You've heard it a million times, right? Is Bitcoin just for criminals, or is it actually the future of money? It's a big question, and by the end of this, you'll have a much better idea of where you stand.
So to even start that conversation, we need to know what it is. First things first, Bitcoin is not a physical coin you can hold. It's pure software. It only exists in digital form, living on a huge network of computers all across the globe. And here's the absolute key. It's decentralized. That means no single bank, no government, no company is in charge. It was the very first of its kind. Right, so if you can't touch it, if you can't hold it, why on earth is it worth so much money? This is where the story gets really, really interesting. Take a look at this number, almost $20,000. That was the peak value of a single Bitcoin back in late 2017.
Now, get this. Just 9 years earlier, in 2008, one Bitcoin was worth about 5 cents. Yeah, you heard me, 5 cents. The explosion in value is just staggering.
So what in the world drives that kind of value? It actually boils down to a really simple idea from Economics 101, scarcity. I mean, think about it. Governments can fire up the printing presses and create more money whenever they want, which can devalue it. But with Bitcoin, the supply is hard-coded. It's literally limited by math.
And here's how that scarcity is built right into the system. The software is designed to automatically slow down how many new Bitcoins get created over time. Roughly every 4 years, the reward for making new coins gets cut in half. This is called the halving, and it pretty much guarantees that the supply gets tighter and tighter. And that all leads to this magic number, 21 million. That's it. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins in existence. Period. The absolute limit is baked into the code, and the very last one won't even be mined until sometime around the year 2140. This built-in scarcity is what makes it so different from regular money. But let's be real, the price isn't the only thing that gets people talking. We have to address its controversial side, right? The connection to crime and all those scary stories about hacks. You've probably heard of the dark web. It's a hidden part of the internet that you access with a special network, usually called Tor. And what Tor does is make a user's activity totally anonymous and untraceable. So you have this anonymous network, and then along comes Bitcoin, which is also really difficult to trace back to one person. You can see how this was a perfect match, right? It quickly became the currency of choice for criminals on the dark web. It was a perfect storm for illegal activity. And that brings us to the other big fear, hacks. Is this stuff even safe? You hear these horror stories about people's digital money just vanishing into thin air. So what's the deal? Okay, this is a really, really important distinction to make. The Bitcoin network itself has never been hacked. The global system is incredibly secure. The hacks you hear about are happening at the user level. It's kind of like a thief isn't breaking into the bank's main vault. They're breaking into your house to steal your debit card and PIN. Hackers target individual computers to steal the private keys, which are basically the passwords to your money. The good news is, these kinds of hacks are almost entirely preventable. Protecting your Bitcoin is a lot like protecting your online bank account. It comes down to basic security hygiene, backing up your wallet, turning on all the security features, and definitely using two-step authentication. But listen, if we only focus on the criminal stuff, we miss the much, much bigger story. We miss how Bitcoin is moving out of the shadows and into the real world. A classic example of this is WikiLeaks. When major financial companies were pressured to block their accounts, they were basically cut off. So they turned to Bitcoin donations. And because nobody can block a Bitcoin transaction, they were able to stay afloat. It was a huge demonstration of its power as censorship-resistant money. And it's not just for activists anymore. I mean, look at this list. These are huge, trusted companies. Microsoft, Dell, Expedia, even Subway. These guys are getting on board. This is a clear sign that Bitcoin is moving way beyond just being a niche hobby. And this really shows you how broad its acceptance is getting. You can book a flight, buy electronics, grab lunch. The list of things you can buy with it grows pretty much every single day. So that leads to a pretty obvious question, doesn't it? If it's so revolutionary and more places are taking it, why isn't everyone using it? Why hasn't it just replaced our credit cards by now? Well, a story from one of the sources we looked at really gets to the heart of the problem. When the writer tried talking to their friends about Bitcoin, this was the immediate reaction, that it's for criminals, a complete shutdown. And their follow-up questions just showed how deep that idea went. So why do you need it? Are you buying something on the dark web? The conversation never even had a chance to start. It just hit a wall of this old, negative reputation. And that really is the crucial point. The biggest hurdle for Bitcoin probably isn't the technology. It's human. It's people getting scared off by old headlines or thinking it's just too complicated, so they give up before they even really start to understand it. Which leaves us with one final big thought to chew on. Is it possible that we have this incredibly powerful, revolutionary tool sitting right in front of us, and we're just a little too lazy to understand it? It's something to think about, because after all, understanding Bitcoin today might be a bit like trying to understand the internet back in 1995.
Okay, so picture this. It's the fall of 2008, and two completely different worlds are about to crash into each other. One of them is a deafening, terrifying roar, a global financial system that's literally collapsing. And the other? It's just a quiet whisper, a single document posted online that almost nobody even saw. In this explainer, we're going to dive into that very collision.
And when you look at the timeline, it is kind of mind-blowing. On September 15th, 2008, Lehman Brothers goes bankrupt, and the whole global financial system just catches fire. Then, just 46 days later, on Halloween of all days, a mysterious paper shows up online that basically proposes an entirely new system. So was that just a wild coincidence, or was it a direct response? That's the mystery we're getting into.
First, let's just rewind for a second and remember what late 2008 actually felt like. The world was gripped by this raw fear. The financial system that we all took for granted was cracking at the seams.
And the thing that really kicked it all off? The collapse of Lehman Brothers. Now, this wasn't just any company going under. This was, and still is, the single largest bankruptcy in the history of the United States. The shockwaves didn't just stay on Wall Street, they rippled across the entire planet. And you saw the domino effect almost immediately. This wasn't some abstract thing happening in the stock market. All of a sudden, unemployment was shooting up, people you knew were losing their homes, and small businesses on your main street were having to shut down for good. This was a crisis that hit everybody. Hard.
And all the while, you turn on the TV, and it was just this constant 24/7 barrage of crisis coverage. In fact, some critics at the time argued that its only real purpose was to create, and I'm quoting here, drama and fear amongst hardworking people, just making this incredibly scary time feel even worse.
But while all that noise, that hurricane of news was raging, something else was happening. A quiet little whisper was starting to emerge from a tiny corner of the internet that pretty much nobody was paying attention to.
And the contrast, you really can't make this up. While the entire world was glued to the big news channels watching the economy just fall apart in real time, a document was quietly posted to this super obscure email list for cryptography nerds. A document that years later would change, pretty much everything.
And that little document? Yeah, it's become the stuff of legend. It was the Bitcoin white paper, and it was published by this anonymous author, or maybe a group of authors, we still don't know, who went by the name Satoshi Nakamoto.
The title itself was so simple, so direct, but it was also unbelievably ambitious. Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. This wasn't just some vague idea. It was a complete blueprint. It laid out a way for people to exchange value directly with each other, person to person, without needing the very same banks and financial institutions that were, at that exact moment, failing the world. But you'd think this world-changing idea would make a huge splash, right? Nope. It basically landed with a thud. For the very few people who even saw it, the reaction was just, meh. They dismissed it as nonsense or said it was way too complicated to even bother with, especially when it felt like the world was on fire. It was a whisper that was just completely drowned out by the storm.
At the very core of this whole paper was a brand new technology, blockchain. And Satoshi didn't just frame it as some neat bit of code. They called it, and this is a direct quote, the solution for the biggest issue that we face. Now, given the timing of the 2008 crash, it's pretty hard not to see the biggest issue as that fragile, centralized financial system that was failing so spectacularly.
So this brings us right back to the beginning, doesn't it? The timing of it all. Was this absolutely revolutionary paper, released right in the middle of a global financial meltdown, just a coincidence? Or was it a direct reaction to it?
This is really the central question of Bitcoin's whole origin story. A system that's designed to work without trusting any central authorities appears at the exact moment that trust in those very authorities had basically evaporated. It's a question that has fueled, just endless speculation ever since.
It really all boils down to that one powerful, simple question. Of all the moments in all of history that this paper could have been published, why then?
Since we still have absolutely no clue who Satoshi Nakamoto really is, we might never get a straight answer. But maybe the context is the answer. Right in the middle of the wreckage of the biggest financial crash in our lifetimes, this quiet, elegant technical solution just appears. Was it just a wild coincidence, or was it the first shot in a quiet revolution? We may never know for sure, but it's one heck of a question to think about.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into one of the biggest mysteries of the entire digital age. Who is the person, or maybe the group of people, who gave the world Bitcoin and then just vanished? So, let's try to unravel the enigma that is Satoshi Nakamoto. I mean, this is the question, right? On one hand, Satoshi is this legendary inventor of both Bitcoin and the blockchain technology that powers it. But on the other hand, we have absolutely no confirmed idea who they are. It's a puzzle that has completely captivated the tech world for well over a decade now. So the only official description we ever got was from Satoshi's own profile on a P2P forum. It said he was a 41-year-old man from Japan. But as you're about to see, the evidence makes that simple picture, well, really complicated. For starters, the original Bitcoin code, it was written in perfect native-level English. Right, and the sheer complexity of this whole project has led a lot of people to believe that Satoshi Nakamoto isn't a person at all, but a fake name for a whole group. Some theories say it was just a couple of collaborators, while others imagine this massive team, maybe even 100 people working in secret. And look, this isn't just some wild fan theory. We're talking about experienced programmers, top software developers, and even cybersecurity experts who've looked at the code and literally called it alien technology. The feeling among many of them is that it's just too intricate, too brilliant for one person to have built all on their own. So who was this ghost in the machine? If we're going to have any chance of finding Satoshi, we first need to build a profile of the creator or creators who literally changed the world and then just disappeared. Okay, so this is the profile of our phantom. We're looking for a genius inventor who used a pseudonym, wrote in flawless English, and then around 2009, just went completely silent. And they left behind this technology so advanced that experts call it alien. It's these contradictions that make the whole mystery so fascinating. The first big break in the case, or what seemed like a big break, came in 2014. The media suddenly zeroed in on this quiet, unassuming engineer living in California, a man named Dorian Nakamoto. And on the surface, you can see why everyone got so excited. First off, his birth name was, in fact, Satoshi Nakamoto. He was also a trained engineer who'd done classified work for the US government. But the real smoking gun, the thing that made everyone think, aha, we got him, was his very first reply to a reporter's email. This quote was an absolute bombshell. It sounded exactly like a creator trying to distance himself from a past project, right? Reporters swarmed his house, and for a short time, it really truly seemed like the mystery was solved. But just as quickly, the whole theory fell apart. Dorian went public and passionately denied everything, saying he never even heard of Bitcoin. He explained that his email was just a big misunderstanding about his old classified engineering jobs. But the final nail in the coffin, well, that came from the ghost himself. Yep. After 5 straight years of complete silence, the original Satoshi Nakamoto account posted this one simple, definitive message on a P2P forum. Case closed. The hunt was back on. Okay, so our investigation continues with a guy who, unlike all our other suspects, actually wants the title. In 2015, an Australian businessman named Craig Wright stepped into the spotlight and is still the only person to publicly claim he is Satoshi Nakamoto. The whole story kicked off with a bunch of documents that were leaked to Wired magazine. These leaks seemed to show Wright talking about a cryptocurrency paper back in August 2008, just before the Bitcoin white paper was released. Then another leak from January 2019 appeared to show him saying Bitcoin is about to launch, and this all led up to his own public declaration in May 2016. So Wright promised the world he would provide definitive, cryptographic proof that he was Satoshi. But then, just 2 days later, he replaced his blog post with this apology, claiming he just didn't have the courage. For almost the entire Bitcoin community, that one act completely destroyed his credibility. Yeah, the skepticism here runs deep. He never provided any public, verifiable proof that experts could actually test. The community was left wondering, why would a privacy-obsessed genius suddenly crave the global spotlight? What was there to gain? It just didn't add up. So this brings us to our final major suspect, a reclusive computer scientist and cryptographer who many tech experts believe is the most likely candidate of all, Nick Szabo.
Now with Szabo, the evidence is totally different. We're not looking at a leaked email or some public claim. No, it's something much more subtle, something hidden in plain sight inside the original Bitcoin white paper.
So, what happened was, some researchers did what's called a linguistic analysis, comparing the writing style of the white paper to a bunch of potential candidates. And the results were striking. Nick Szabo's public writings were the closest match to Satoshi's. But there's more. A full decade before Bitcoin, Szabo designed a remarkably similar digital currency he called BitGold. It was a system where users would solve cryptographic puzzles to mine new tokens, which were then secured on a public ledger. Sound familiar? It was never fully built, but the conceptual blueprint for Bitcoin is just undeniable. And kind of weirdly, after years of not mentioning it, he started blogging about BitGold again just 2 months after Bitcoin came out. So even with all this compelling evidence, there is one major problem. Nick Szabo has consistently and very firmly denied being Satoshi Nakamoto. And just like the figure he's suspected of being, he's an extremely private person, and he has since gone completely silent on the topic. So after digging into all of the main suspects, where does that leave us? Well, we're left with a collection of really compelling clues, some very firm denials, and a bunch of unproven claims. Let's recap real quick. We have Dorian Nakamoto, who had the name but was ultimately cleared by the real Satoshi. We have Craig Wright, who made the claim but never actually provided the proof. And then there's Nick Szabo, who has the strongest technical and linguistic connections but denies it all. For each one, the trail just goes cold. This has led some people to a completely different theory, that the name itself is actually the biggest clue. See, in Japanese, Satoshi can mean wise, Naka means inside, and Moto means foundation. So if you put it all together, you get something like wise with a deep understanding of the system's foundation. Maybe it never represented a person, but an idea. And that leaves us with one final thought. Bitcoin was designed to be a decentralized system, one without a central authority, without a leader. So if the creator of that very system remains anonymous, faceless, and without authority, maybe that isn't a flaw in the story. Maybe that's the final and most brilliant feature of the entire design.
Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a concept that's really shaking up how we think about money, ownership, and even trust itself. It's called the distributed ledger.
So I want to start with this one question. Just think about it for a second. What if your bank account had no bank? No central building, no single company in charge, and absolutely no one you could call for help. You know, it sounds a little weird, maybe even a bit scary, but that's the core idea behind the tech we're exploring today.
So what is a distributed ledger? The easiest way to picture it is like a giant public family tree. But instead of tracking people and who's related to who, it tracks value. It literally holds a record of every single transaction that's ever happened, all the way back to the very first one. It shows the amount, the date, the time, the addresses. But here's the kicker. Those addresses aren't tied to any names or real-world identities. It's a record book with no banker in sight, and that changes everything.
All right, so how does this brand new system really stack up against the traditional banking we're all used to? Let's put them head-to-head and see what's what. First up, let's talk about control. With a traditional bank, yeah, you have access to your money, but let's be real. The bank, and by extension the government, they have the final say. They've got the ultimate control. In a distributed ledger system, though, control is absolute, and it belongs to just one person, whoever holds the password. No one else, period.
And what about identity? Well, your bank account is completely tied to you. Your name, your address, all your personal info. A crypto account on the ledger, however, is just tied to an anonymous address, which is basically a long string of letters and numbers. Anyone can see that address, but nobody knows it belongs to you.
Now, when you combine that absolute control with total anonymity, you get a really crucial difference: seizure. Because a bank has control and knows who you are, your account can be frozen or seized. With a crypto account, that's just not possible. As long as you're the only one with that password, nobody can touch your funds. That is a huge shift, right? It points to a world where your assets could be safe from things like censorship or being taken away without your consent.
But, and this is a really big but, here's the trade-off: password recovery. If you lose your bank password, you just call them up, prove it's you, and they'll get you a new one. It's pretty simple. But if you lose the password to your crypto wallet, those funds are gone. Like, forever. There is nobody to call. So while this system gives you total power, it also demands total responsibility.
So you might be wondering, if there's no central authority, no bank, no regulator, what's to stop people from cheating? How does this whole thing stay honest and secure? Well, the process is actually fascinating.
Let's just walk through what happens when you make a transaction. First, you start a payment. Instantly, the entire network of users, or citizens as one of our sources calls them, automatically checks it to make sure it's legit. Once it's confirmed, your transaction gets bundled with a bunch of others into a new block. This block then gets cryptographically sealed by miners. You can think of it like a digital wax seal that's impossible to forge. And finally, that new block gets permanently changed to the one before it, creating this unbreakable public record, the blockchain.
And the result of all that? Well, because every single person on the network is involved in validating every step, it becomes nearly impossible to counterfeit money or create fake transactions. The security is literally built into the community itself.
On top of that, the ledger is completely transparent. Every transaction gets its own unique ID, called a hash. I know, it looks like a crazy, random code, but it's actually the key that lets you see all the details of any transaction, right out in the open.
And this is basically what that crazy-looking hash shows you. If you look up a transaction, you can see all this: the anonymous from and to addresses, the exact amount sent, the tiny fee, and the timestamp. It's all public, but the real-world identities behind it all stay private. It's this amazing balance of being both transparent and anonymous at the same time.
Okay, so let's really nail down what this all means for you, the user. It really comes down to this big trade-off between power and responsibility.
I want you to let this number sink in for a minute. 1. In this whole system, there is only one person who can control your funds. One person who has the password. One person who can send, receive, or do anything at all. And that one person is you. And what that really means is there's no safety net. There's no customer service line you can call, no manager you can ask to speak to. This system gives you all the power of a bank, but it also demands that you take on every single bit of the responsibility that comes with it.
Okay, let's wrap this all up. Let's really crystallize the core principles of this powerful technology. What are the main things you should walk away with from this explainer?
So, let's break it down real simple. It's decentralized. No single person or company is calling the shots. It's transparent, so every transaction is public and can be checked. It's anonymous, so your real identity is separate from your account. It's immutable, meaning once a record is in there, it can't ever be changed. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it's totally user-controlled. It's your money, your rules.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. You know, for centuries, our whole financial world has been built on trusting institutions, banks, governments, you name it. This technology offers a totally different way. So I'll just leave you with this question. What happens when trust isn't built by people in suits, but by mathematical code that anyone can see and verify for themselves? The answer to that could redefine, well, everything. Not just finance, but voting, ownership, supply chains, you name it. It could change the world. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, let's dive into one of the most important, but maybe one of the most misunderstood roles in the entire crypto world, the Bitcoin miner. I mean, we hear the term all the time. They're the backbone of the whole system, the guardians of the public ledger. But who are they really? Let's get into it. It's a really good question, right? They don't just magically appear out of thin air. There isn't a central bank just printing them up. So how does new money actually get into the Bitcoin ecosystem? Well, to answer that, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. So, picture this. It's 2008, and Bitcoin's creator, the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto, has this huge puzzle to solve. I mean, you're building an entirely new kind of money from the ground up. How do you even start? How do you release it into the world in a way that's fair, secure, and actually gives it value? Now, Satoshi knew that if he just created all 21 million Bitcoins in one go, they'd be worthless. Scarcity was absolutely key. So the system kicked off with just 50,000 coins. But this created a couple of even bigger problems that needed a really clever solution. So here was the real challenge. First, how do you fairly and gradually introduce more Bitcoin into circulation? And second, and this is the big one, how do you make sure every single transaction is legit without having a bank or some central company checking everything? He needed one single elegant solution to solve both of these problems at the same time. And this is where the genius comes in. Satoshi created a special role in the network, a job, and he called it the miner. And this role does both things at once. Miners do all the hard work of checking and verifying transactions, and for doing that work, they get rewarded with brand new Bitcoins. Problem solved?
But hold on, why call them miners? It's not like they're swinging a digital pickaxe, right? Well, the name is actually this perfect analogy that connects this super abstract digital process to something we can all understand from the real physical world. Think about it this way. Gold miners use a ton of real energy, actual physical work, to dig a scarce resource, gold, out of the ground. Bitcoin miners use a ton of real energy, in this case, computational power, to solve puzzles and earn a scarce digital resource. In both cases, real-world effort is spent to create new value. It just makes sense.
So while the name miner really stuck because it's so easy to get, there are other names for them, like finalizers or authenticators. And honestly, those names might actually be a little more accurate because their most important job is to authenticate transactions and finalize the public record forever.
Okay, so that's the concept. But what started as an idea has exploded into a massive global industry. The old image of some lone coder mining for Bitcoin in their basement, yeah, that's pretty much ancient history. The modern miner looks a lot different today.
In the very early days, pretty much anyone with a decent home PC could be a miner. But as Bitcoin got bigger and more valuable, the puzzles got way harder and the whole thing became a professional industry. Today, it's pretty much dominated by huge specialized companies. Yeah, we're talking about giant operations run by companies like Antpool, F2 Pool, and Genesis Mining. These places are basically massive data centers, just filled to the brim with specialized computers. It's almost impossible for just one person to compete anymore, so a lot of individuals join what are called mining pools to combine their computer power with others. And this chart really gives you a good look at the landscape. You can see the big name pools control a huge piece of the pie. But see that big slice there labeled unknown? Who are they? This is where it gets really interesting. These unknown miners are a pretty mysterious group. They often use privacy tools like the Tor browser to completely hide who they are and where they're located. It's a really powerful reminder that even though Bitcoin's ledger is public, the people securing it don't always want to be. So besides just making new coins, what is the final product of all this work? What are miners actually creating? Well, it's something pretty incredible. A permanent, totally unchangeable history of every single transaction. So here's how it works, step by step. Miners are constantly listening and gathering up all the transactions happening on the network. They check them all to make sure they're valid, then they bundle them up into a block. Then they all race to solve that complex puzzle that basically seals the block and attaches it to the end of the chain. And let me be really clear here. This process takes a staggering, almost unimaginable amount of computing power. But that difficulty, that's a feature, not a bug. It's what makes the entire network so secure. It makes it practically impossible for any one person to go back and try to change the past. Once a miner successfully adds their block to the chain, every transaction inside is locked in. It becomes a permanent part of history. It is permanent. It is irreversible. It is unchangeable. That right there is the miner's final product, digital certainty. And that kind of leads us to a final, really big thought. Miners are absolutely essential. They create the currency and they secure the entire system. But they're also this scattered, competitive, and often anonymous group all over the world. It leaves us with this fascinating question. In a system with no boss, no central bank, who really holds the power? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, so have you ever really thought about where new Bitcoins come from? Like, how are they actually made? It's not some government mint printing them out, and it's definitely not a tech company just firing up a server. Nope. The truth is way, way cooler than that. So let's dive in and pull back the curtain on this whole thing. Which brings us to the big question, right? How is a new Bitcoin born? I want you to just forget everything you think you know about how regular money is made. Bitcoin? Well, it's a completely different animal. See, the best way to wrap your head around it isn't to think of a factory or a mint. Instead, I want you to picture a global, non-stop, super high-stakes competition. Yeah, you heard me. It's a race. So welcome to the Great Digital Race, and this isn't about who's the fastest runner. Not at all. This is a race of pure computational power and just unbelievably meticulous, unforgiving work. So who's competing? Let's meet them.
Okay, so our competitors are called miners. And no, we're not talking about people with pickaxes and hard hats. These are super powerful computers humming away all over the globe. Think of them as the accountants for the entire Bitcoin network. And that job, that accounting, is absolutely crucial for keeping the whole system honest and secure. They check every single transaction to make sure nobody's trying to cheat, like spending the same Bitcoin twice. So what's the goal here? Well, for every single one of these miners, the objective is simple, but it's incredibly hard. Be the first one to grab a whole bunch of recent, valid transactions, bundle them all up into what's called a block, and then successfully slap that block onto the public record, what we call the blockchain. And you know what's wild? This race has a built-in rhythm. Out of the thousands upon thousands of miners competing 24/7, only one can win. And a winner emerges, on average, every 10 minutes. Just like clockwork. A new block is created, and boom, the race starts all over again from scratch. But here's the thing, winning this race isn't just about having the fastest computer. Not even close. It all starts with this phase of just insanely careful preparation. You can think of it like this. You have to build the perfect race car before you can even think about hitting the track. So here's what that prep work looks like, kind of a miner's checklist. First, they start a brand new empty block. Then they start grabbing transactions that are waiting on the network. But, and this is the most important part, they have to play detective. They have to validate every single one of those transactions to make sure it's legit. Then, and only then, can they add it to their block. And they just keep doing that until the block is full. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. One wrong move and the whole thing just goes up in smoke. It's a total minefield. And I mean a massive minefield. Because if you make one wrong move, if one tiny little error slips past you, well, the consequences are swift and they are brutal. You see, the rules of this race are just absolute. There's no gray area. So imagine a miner is halfway through building their block, everything's going great, and then they realize, uh-oh, they've accidentally included one single fake transaction. Everything, and I mean everything, just grinds to a halt. And this really shows you how unforgiving the whole system is. You can't just take out the bad transaction and keep going. Nope, you have to throw away the entire block. All that precious work, all that electricity, all that computing power, gone. You're sent right back to the starting line. You have to start all over. Okay, so let's say our miner has done it. They've navigated the minefield, they've built a perfect block full of valid transactions. Now comes the really intense part, the final, frantic sprint to the finish line. And these final moments are super tense. First, the miner does a quick check. Has anyone else already won in the last few seconds? If the coast looks clear, they have to solve this really complex math problem to seal the block. That's kind of like the final stamp of approval. Once that's done, they blast it out to the entire network, basically shouting, "I won! I won!" But get this, even right here at the finish line, victory is still not a sure thing. This competition is the definition of winner take all. Finishing in second place, even by a millisecond, is exactly the same as not finishing at all. So just picture it, you've done everything right. You broadcast your perfect, sealed block, only to find out that another miner's winning block hit the network a split second before yours. The network says, sorry, you were too late. They accept the first one, and your block, even though it's flawless, just gets thrown in the trash. And there it is again, that brutal, brutal phrase, start all over. All that careful work, all that computer power, all that electricity, poof, wasted. You get absolutely nothing for second place. So what do? You drop everything, and you start the race all over again for the very next block. All right, so this brings us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Why in the world would anyone sign up for this? This race is incredibly hard, it's super expensive, and it's full of risk. The answer, as you can probably guess, is all about the prize. I mean, seriously, let's just think about that for a second. You're constantly at risk of having to start from scratch. The cost for the computers and the electricity is just enormous. So why would you even bother? Well, because this is what you get if you win. For being the first to create a valid block, the miner gets a reward of brand new, freshly created Bitcoin. This is called the block reward, and it's literally how new Bitcoins are born. As of right now, that prize for winning the 10-minute race is 6.25 Bitcoin. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. This is a key part of Bitcoin's whole design.
To make it scarce, kind of like gold, that reward doesn't stay the same forever. It's actually programmed to get cut in half about every 4 years. It's a huge, predictable event called the halving.
And you can see it right here. Back when Bitcoin first got started, the prize for winning this race was a whopping 50 Bitcoin. Then, in 2012, chop, it was cut to 25. In 2016, it was chopped again to 12.5. And today, we're at 6.25. This whole idea of predictable scarcity, it's not a bug. It's a fundamental feature of the system.
And this process, this halving, is just going to keep on happening again and again. So fewer and fewer new coins get made with each cycle, until the very last sliver of a Bitcoin is finally mined, which is projected to be around the year 2140. And after that, that's it. No more new Bitcoin will ever be created. Ever.
So that leaves us with one last really fascinating question to think about. This whole massive global race, it's all powered by that block reward. But what happens as that reward gets smaller and smaller and eventually disappears completely? What's going to motivate miners to keep the race going then? The answer to that question, well, it's probably going to define the entire future of Bitcoin.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a huge question, one that really gets to the heart of all this crypto stuff. Is the blockchain actually unhackable? I mean, that's a seriously bold claim, so let's dig in.
Before we can even touch blockchain, we gotta ask a more basic question, something about the digital world we're all living in. When you hear the word secure, what does that even mean anymore? Is there anything out there that's genuinely 100% impossible to break into? Okay, let's start with the places we're supposed to trust the most. Our banks. Where we keep our money, our entire financial lives. But here's the scary truth. They get compromised so often that a lot of them just stopped announcing the smaller breaches. Why? Well, they don't want to scare us, the customers. That doesn't exactly make you feel safe, does it? All right, what about the top cops, the FBI? They've got to be locked down tight, right? Well, you might remember the story. The director of the FBI himself was famously hacked by a teenager. It just goes to show, you can have all the best security plans in the world, but one clever person can still find a way in. So let's go to the very top of the food chain, the National Security Agency. Secrecy is literally their whole job. But then, Edward Snowden happened, and that proved that even the NSA isn't bulletproof. Secrets can get out. No system, it seems, is perfectly sealed. And that leads us to this pretty grim reality that security experts live with every day. For almost any system out there, a hack isn't a question of if it's going to happen, it's just a question of when. Give a smart attacker enough time and enough resources, and they will eventually find a crack.
So you have to wonder, what's the common denominator here? What's the one big flaw that banks, the FBI, and even the NSA all share?
The problem, in a word, is centralization. It's this idea that you take all your important stuff, all your data, all your controls, and lock it away in one single super protected place. You basically build a fortress. But in doing that, you've also just created a single, giant, flashing target for every bad guy on the planet. This chart just lays it out perfectly. Think about it this way. The old model, the centralized one, it's like a castle. It has big, strong walls, sure, but if someone gets over that wall, they have the keys to the entire kingdom. The blockchain model, the decentralized one, that's more like a swarm of bees. Where do you even begin to attack? There's no single weak spot because the security comes from the entire crowd. And that is the key, that single point of failure. When you put all your eggs in one basket, it makes that basket incredibly tempting to steal. It lets an attacker focus all of their energy, all of their resources on breaking into that one spot.
So how does blockchain get around this? Well, it doesn't just patch the problem. It flips the entire model completely on its head. It throws out the whole idea of a central fortress and builds its security on a totally different foundation. And this is where it gets really mind-bending. Blockchain doesn't use the usual security tools. You won't find any fancy firewalls or complex intrusion detection systems guarding it. So how in the world does it stay safe?
The secret sauce is the power of the crowd. Since the whole thing is decentralized, there's no main server to attack. There isn't one master copy of the record book. Instead, every single person on the network has their own identical copy.
So, if a hacker wanted to change a transaction, they wouldn't just have to fool one computer, they'd have to convince more than half of the entire global network that their fake transaction is the real one. Good luck with that.
And what's really amazing is how you become a part of this. Anyone can join. You don't need permission from anybody. You just download the software, it's free, it's open source, and you run it. The second you do that, your computer gets a copy of the entire history of transactions, and you instantly become another link in the chain, another guard making the whole network even stronger.
Okay, so the theory sounds incredible. But how does this radical idea actually hold up in the real world? Because talk is cheap, right? Let's look at the actual numbers. The track record is just staggering. The Bitcoin blockchain has been up and running for nearly a decade now. And in all of that time, the core system has never been compromised. Not once. No successful attacks. No one's even been able to slow it down in any meaningful way. And just to put the security to the ultimate test, someone put out a bounty, an anonymous prize. This number, $7 billion, was offered to anyone, anywhere in the world, who could actually break the system. And for years now, crickets. That massive prize is still sitting there completely untouched. Now think about that. That bounty made the blockchain the #1 public target for the best hackers in the world, for huge criminal organizations, for sophisticated cyber gangs. They've all had a crack at it, and every single one of them has failed. But, and you knew there was a but coming, this incredible record doesn't mean it's invincible forever. Like with any technology, people are always looking ahead, trying to figure out what the next big threat on the horizon might be. And right now, there are two main theoretical threats that people talk about. One is a massive technological leap that we haven't made yet. And the other is a human mystery that's been there from the very beginning. First, there's the tech threat, quantum computing. The idea is that a quantum computer could one day become powerful enough to break the encryption that keeps the blockchain safe. But the sheer scale of this challenge is just immense. We're talking about needing a computer powerful enough to hack over 1 million different machines all at the exact same time. And you'd have to do it almost instantly for it to even work. The second potential threat is way more mysterious. It's the creator themselves, the person or people known only as Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody knows who they are. And as the one who designed the whole system, who mined the very first block, it's kind of a spooky thought experiment. Did they build in some kind of secret backdoor? Is there some way they could manipulate the system they created? We just don't know. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. The blockchain's incredible security comes from being open, decentralized, and built on a system where you don't have to trust anyone. But at its very origin, at the very beginning, there's a complete and total mystery. So could the anonymity of its creator, the very thing that has fascinated everyone for years, also be its one final secret weakness? What if I told you that the future of our entire financial system is being tested right now inside a video game? I know, it sounds a little crazy, right? But the next evolution of money might just be hiding in plain sight. I mean, think about it. What could online video games, the ones millions of us sink hours and hours into, what could they possibly have to do with our global economy? Well, as it turns out, a whole lot more than you'd think. The connection is this incredible technology that's quietly, rewriting the very rules of value itself. Okay, so let's dive into that. We're going to start in the digital world because we're seeing this really fascinating new trend where gaming communities, well, they're not just playing anymore, they're actually building real tangible economic value. So developers are creating these online games where the players are part of a whole new kind of economy, one that's powered by cryptocurrency. Here's how it works. Imagine a game with its own digital cash. As thousands, even millions of people play, their computers are actually working in the background, helping to secure the game's network. It's kind of like every single player is a mini banker. And the more people who play, the more secure and valuable that currency becomes. Just by logging on and playing, they're building a real economy, literally from the ground out. Okay, so the fact that a gaming community can literally build a working currency from scratch, well, it kind of forces us to take a hard look at our own money, right? If they can do it, what are the problems with the cash we use every single day? Turns out, our system has always had a few bugs.
I mean, for ages, we use stuff like gold. But let's be real, it's heavy, and you can't exactly break off a sliver to buy a cup of coffee. So we moved to paper money. And look, it was a great idea, but it came with some serious issues. For one, governments can just print more whenever they want, which makes the money in your pocket worth less. That's inflation. It can be counterfeited, and maybe the biggest thing, the entire system is controlled by just a few central banks and governments.
All right, so that's where this whole new technology comes into play. To try and fix all those problems with physical money, a brand new kind of digital money was invented, and it was built on this revolutionary idea called the blockchain.
So what is cryptocurrency? Well, at its core, it's a digital currency built on that blockchain tech, and it's designed specifically so that it can't be faked, copied, or counterfeited. The real game changer here is that the blockchain creates trust using math, which means you don't need a bank or a government sitting in the middle of everything. It's a huge deal.
Okay, but a common question comes up right away. People hear that Bitcoin, the original crypto, has a fixed supply. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins created. So you've got to wonder, how could that possibly be enough to go around for the entire planet? Well, the secret is in how divisible it is. You see, each individual Bitcoin can be split into 100 million tiny little pieces. They're called Satoshis. So the total supply isn't really 21 million, it's this massive number, 2 quadrillion, 100 trillion individual units. So what does that even mean? When you do the math, that's enough to give every single person on Earth more than 262,000 units. And if that's still not enough, you can divide those units even smaller. So yeah, scarcity of coins, not really the problem. But look, this technology is about way more than just fixing old problems with money. For billions of people around the world, it represents something totally new, something like real economic freedom, a bank in your pocket. Just think about this number for a second. 1.7 billion. That's the number of adults right now who don't have access to a bank account. For all kinds of reasons, they are completely locked out of the traditional financial system. Now, for many of us, opening a bank account is pretty straightforward, but for a huge chunk of the world, it's like hitting a brick wall. You need to be 18, you need a valid address, you have to show proof of a job and income, pass a credit check, and you probably have to physically go to a bank branch. If you're missing just one of those things, sorry, you're out. Now compare all of that to opening a Bitcoin wallet. What do you need? A smartphone and an internet connection. That's it. That is the entire list. There's no one there to tell you no. There's a great quote that really just hits the nail on the head here. Blockchain might as well become their bank, right? Why not? And that's exactly it. For those 1.7 billion people, many of whom do have a phone and internet, this technology can just become their bank. It's a direct line to being part of the global economy. And the benefits are just immediate. I mean, think about sending money to another country using the old banking system, right? You're looking at 3 to 5 business days for it to go through. With crypto, that exact same transaction happens securely in just a few seconds. It's a total game changer. But as incredible as all this is for the world of finance, the story does not end there, not even close. The blockchain technology that makes all of this possible, think of it as a foundation for a completely new, more connected future. Yeah, try to think of it less as just digital money and more like a whole new kind of internet. An internet of value, where trust is literally baked into the code. And once you have that, the possibilities, well, they're just incredible. I'm talking about things like smart contracts that just run themselves automatically, no lawyers needed. We're talking about totally new ways to crowdfund projects, secure supply chains, so you can track a product from the factory to your door with perfect trust. We're even talking about the fundamental building blocks for intelligent transportation, virtual power plants, and yeah, truly smart cities. And this all leads to one of the biggest ideas out there. This is the tech that could finally power the Internet of Things, or IoT. It provides that secure, trusted network for all the billions of smart devices, from the stuff in your home to self-driving cars, to talk to each other and even transact with each other all on their own. So there you have it. We started this whole conversation with video games, and now we're talking about smart cities. It feels like a massive leap, I know, but it all comes back to this one core foundational technology, which really only leaves one question, doesn't it? Is this the technology that's going to run the world of tomorrow? Okay, let's be honest for a second. When you hear the word blockchain, what's the very first thing that pops in your head? For pretty much everyone, it's Bitcoin, right? And look, that makes a lot of sense. But what if that's only a tiny, tiny piece of the puzzle?
So that's the big question we're going to tackle today. Is blockchain really just a one-hit wonder, a technology that's only good for creating cryptocurrencies? Or is it something much, much bigger? And, to really get where this is all going, we actually have to take a step back and look at a story you already know by heart. To figure out where we're headed with this new tech, we've got to look at a pattern of innovation that is probably super familiar to you. Trust me, you've seen this exact story play out before. I mean, just think about how you watch movies or listen to music. Remember VHS tapes? Having to rewind them? Or those giant binders full of CDs and DVDs? It feels like ancient history now, doesn't it? You had all these clunky physical things taking up space on your shelf. And now? Well, everything is just streamed. Instantly. And that whole journey from a clunky tape to a high-def stream, it shows us a basic fundamental rule of technology. Things inevitably get better. They get faster, higher quality, way more convenient, and usually a whole lot cheaper. It's a pattern that just repeats itself over and over and over again. So here's the kicker. If we can stream a 4K movie to our phone from halfway across the planet in a split second, why can't we do the same thing with our money? Why is money still so slow and clunky? Really thinking about that question is the key to unlocking what blockchain is truly trying to do. Okay, to really nail this down, I've got the perfect analogy for you. And honestly, if you take just one thing away from all of this, let it be this comparison right here. It takes us back to the 90s. Here it is. Blockchain today is pretty much exactly where the internet was back in the mid-90s. Seriously, think about it. Back then, the internet was this weird kind of clunky thing that mostly academics and, let's face it, nerds were using. Most people were just like, what even is this? Why would I ever need it? That's blockchain right now. And here's the really wild part. Back in the 90s, when people did start to get what the internet was, they all said the same thing. Oh, it's for email. Email was the killer app. It was the one thing everyone could wrap their heads around. Sound familiar? Because today, everyone says, oh, blockchain, that's the thing for Bitcoin. It's the exact same misconception. Bitcoin is just the first killer app. But of course, we all know how that story ended. Email is still hugely important, for sure. But the internet also gave us, well, everything. Social media, streaming services, online shopping, video calls with family across the globe. Things that were pure science fiction back then. So think of it this way. Bitcoin is the email of 2024. It's just the very, very beginning of what this new kind of internet can do. Okay, so enough with the analogies. If it's not just about Bitcoin, what kind of real-world problems can this technology actually solve? Well, let's take a look at a really common one, sending money to someone in another country. Right now, if you want to do that, the whole process is kind of a nightmare. You go to your bank, and they use this old system called SWIFT to basically send a message to another bank, which might have to send a message to another bank. It's this whole complicated chain. And the result? It takes like 3 to 5 business days, and every single bank along that chain takes a little slice of your money in fees. And the whole reason it's so slow and expensive is that we rely on all these middlemen, these so-called trusted third parties. We literally need a bank to stand in the middle of a transaction between two people and say, yep, he has the money, and then tell the other bank, okay, you can give her the money now. They're the gatekeepers of the entire financial system. Now get this, the difference with blockchain is just night and day. We're talking about taking a process that takes days and shrinking it down to mere seconds. And all those high fees that get chipped away from your money, they basically vanish. And how does it pull this off? It's actually pretty simple. It just cuts out the middleman. You don't need the banks to validate anything anymore. The network itself, this distributed, secure network, does the validation. So you and I can send money directly to each other, peer to peer. It's a total game changer. But honestly, making international transfers a little bit faster is really just a convenience for people who already have bank accounts. The real world-changing potential of this technology might be for the billions of people who don't. We tend to take it for granted, but opening a traditional bank account is actually pretty hard. You need all this documentation, a fixed address, proof of a job, you have to be a certain age. Some people just live hours away from the nearest physical bank branch. And believe it or not, some sources even report people being turned away just for not wearing the proper clothes to walk into a bank. It's pretty crazy. And because of all those barriers, you get this absolutely staggering number, 1.7 times billion. That's billion with a B. That's how many adults on this planet have no bank account at all. They're what we call unbanked, and they're almost completely cut off from the modern global economy.
And this is where blockchain could be truly revolutionary. It just completely sidesteps all those old world problems. You don't need a physical address or a suit and tie. All you need is a smartphone and an internet connection. That's it. With just those two things, you can have a digital wallet. You can save, you can send, you can receive money. All of a sudden, blockchain has the potential to become the bank for the unbanked, offering financial inclusion on a scale we've just never seen before. And look, this isn't some science fiction fantasy about the future. This is happening as we speak. People around the world are using this technology today. And you better believe the traditional banks are paying very close attention. In fact, many are scrambling to create their own digital currencies because they know if they don't adapt, they are going to get left in the dust. So it really all comes full circle, doesn't it? We started by talking about how our movies and music went from being physical objects to just streams of data. And now money is making that exact same leap. So the question I want to leave you with is this. If money can now flow as freely and instantly as a song on Spotify, what other part of our world is about to change next? All right, let's talk about blockchain. But today, we're going to skip all the hype about prices and coins. Instead, we're going to pop the hood and look at the engine that makes it all run, the peer-to-peer network. So let's get into it. You know, it's funny. Most revolutionary ideas aren't built from scratch. They're usually just really clever combinations of things that were already out there. And blockchain is the perfect example of this. It didn't invent some crazy new technology. It just stacked existing, proven ideas together in a brand new and pretty brilliant way. I love this quote because it just perfectly captures where we are right now. Do you remember the mid-90s when so many people thought the internet was, well, just for email? That's exactly where we are with blockchain today. A lot of people see it and think, oh, that's just for Bitcoin. But you and I know, just like email was only the first big thing for the internet, Bitcoin is just the first big thing for blockchain. So here's what we're going to do. We'll kick things off with how innovation actually gets built. Then we'll look at the networks we use every single day, the ones with a boss, and compare them to this new network of equals that blockchain is built on. We'll see how that new model creates trust, and finally wrap up with why this is such a huge deal. Okay, Section 1, Innovation's Building Blocks. You gotta know the foundation before you can build the house, right? At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about here. The internet, blockchain, they're both fundamentally new ways to organize and share information. But to really get what makes blockchain so different, we have to look at the network it runs on. And as you're about to see, it's nothing like the digital world we're all used to. Which brings us right to Section 2, the network with a boss. Before we dive into the new stuff, we have to understand the system that powers almost everything we do online today. So this is the classic setup. Just picture it. You've got one main central computer, a primary server that holds all the data and has all the power. Every other device, whether it's your phone or your laptop, is what we call a client, and it has to connect to that central server to get anything done. This boss analogy is perfect. Seriously, think of a traditional company. There's a CEO at the very top, the boss. They have the final say on everything. Information flows up to them and orders flow down from them. That boss is the single source of truth, the single point of control. And right there, that's the big weakness in this whole model. That single point of control is also a single point of failure, or even worse, a single point of corruption. So, what happens if you can't trust the boss? Let's make this real. Imagine you send some data to the server. The boss gets it. Now, it can do a few sneaky things. It could, say, secretly change that data before passing it along. Or maybe it decides to share your data with some people, but not others. Or, even worse, it could just keep it, hide it completely. And in this system, how would anyone else ever know they're being lied to? So, if the boss model is so risky, what's the alternative? Well, that brings us to Section 3, a network of equals. This is where things get really interesting. Just look at the difference here, side by side. On the left, you've got the familiar boss model, but on the right, a totally flat structure. No boss, no central control, no hierarchy at all. Everyone is an equal, and they all make decisions together. This isn't just a small technical tweak. It's a whole new philosophy. And this no-boss model has a name. It's a peer-to-peer network, or P2P for short. Every single computer, every node that connects to it is a peer. They are all on the exact same level. No one is in charge.
So how in the world does this actually work? Well, it's fascinating. Every single computer on the network is both a client and a server at the same time. It's constantly asking for information and also providing it. No single machine has any more power than any other. They all have to work together, and the responsibility for keeping the network running is shared equally among everyone. Now we get to the big connection. Section 4, the foundation of trust. We've seen the two models, so let's put it all together and see why this P2P, bossless structure is the absolute bedrock of blockchain.
And this is the key question, isn't it? I mean, centralized networks work fine for our email and social media, so why go through all this trouble to create this complicated no-boss system just for a digital ledger?
And the answer is the ledger itself. See, a blockchain is designed from the ground up to be a single, shared source of truth that nobody owns or controls. And for that to have any meaning, everyone on the network has to have the exact same copy. If there was a central boss, they could just lie and change their version. But in a P2P network, that's basically impossible.
This is how that P2P structure creates trust that you can actually verify for yourself. A hacker can't just attack one central server and call it a day. No, they'd have to try and compromise thousands, maybe even millions of computers all at the same time. It's practically impossible. It also means there's no off switch. If a few computers go offline, who cares? The network just keeps on running.
This quote just nails it. The trust here isn't based on some company's marketing slogan or a government's promise. Nope. The trust is literally built into the architecture. The math and the way the network is designed is the proof that we can trust it.
All right, let's bring it all home. Section 5, why is P2P so key? Let's quickly go over the most important things to remember.
So let's boil it all down to 3 huge advantages. First, it's efficient. You get rid of those expensive central servers, so you cut down on overhead. Second, it's secure. A distributed network is incredibly hard to cheat or manipulate. And third, you get rid of the middleman. By taking out that central boss, you can build systems that are way faster, cheaper, and more direct. And this really leaves us with a huge, fascinating question. The first major use for this whole no-boss idea was money, right? Something that needs absolute trust to work. So if we can build a trustworthy global system for money without needing a central authority, what else can we build? What about voting systems or tracking products in a supply chain? What about a secure digital identity that you control? The possibilities are just starting to open up. Thanks for joining me.
All right, today we're jumping into a concept that's honestly the secret sauce behind so much of our digital lives, hashing. It's everywhere, from your passwords to cryptocurrencies, and we're going to break it down.
And look, this quote really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? When you hear a word like cryptography, your brain might just want to check out. It sounds super complex, maybe something only a genius can understand. But stick with me, because we're about to show you that's not true at all.
You know, the history of cryptography is pretty wild, going back centuries to codes and ciphers. But we're not going to get lost in the weeds today. Instead, we're going to zero in on one simple but incredibly powerful idea from the modern world of computers. And that idea is hashing.
So what is hashing? I think the best way to wrap your head around it is to think of it as a digital fingerprint, right? Just like every person has a unique fingerprint, every single digital file can get its own totally unique hash. But how do we make that fingerprint?
Okay, here's the textbook definition. Hashing is just a process. You take some kind of input, literally any file, you run it through a special mathematical function, and what pops out the other side is a string of letters and numbers that's always the same length. And that final string? That's the hash.
And seriously, when we say any input, we mean anything digital. It's not just for text messages. You can hash a photo from your phone, an MP3 of your favorite song, a huge movie file, or even an entire software program. If it's digital, you can give it a fingerprint.
Let's break it down into 3 super simple steps. 1, you start with your file. 2, you apply the hash function. Think of it like a mathematical recipe. And 3, you get your output, which is a unique, scrambled-up hash. It's a one-way street. Input, process, output. Simple as that.
Now, that's all the theory, but to really get this, you've got to see it in action. We're going to do a quick little demonstration that shows just how unbelievably powerful this whole process really is. This is where it gets fun.
For our experiment, we're going to take something really simple, just the word blockchain. We're going to feed this one word into a hashing function and see what kind of digital fingerprint it generates.
The specific tool we're going to use is called an MD5 hash function. Don't worry too much about the name. The MD just means message digest. It's one of many types of hash functions out there, and it's perfect for showing you what we mean.
And there it is. We put the word blockchain in, and the MD5 function spits this out, a long, messy-looking, seemingly random string of letters and numbers. That right there is the unique digital fingerprint for the word blockchain. Okay, but here's the real question. What do you think would happen to that hash if we made the tiniest possible change to our input? What if we just add the number 1 to the end? What's going to happen? And this is the aha moment. Look at that. The new hash isn't just a little bit different. It is completely and totally unrecognizable. By adding one single character, we got an entirely new digital fingerprint. This is called the avalanche effect, and it's the whole point.
So that's a cool trick, right? But what's the big deal? Why does this extreme sensitivity actually matter in the real world? Let's connect the dots.
See, this isn't some weird glitch. Hashing is designed to work this way. This sensitivity means you can instantly verify if a file has been changed at all. You can't just tweak one little thing and hope for a similar hash. It's either a perfect match or it's not, all or nothing. So this little demo perfectly sums up the key properties of hashing, right? Every input gets its own unique hash. The hash is always the same length. Doesn't matter if you're hashing one word or a whole movie. And most importantly, like we just saw, the smallest change creates a completely different fingerprint. So that brings us to the final question. If you have this incredible tool that can instantly tell you if even a single speck of data has been changed, where would that be useful? Well, it's how you download software and know it's legit. It's how websites store your password securely without actually knowing it. And yeah, it's the absolute foundation for technologies like blockchain, which need a perfect, unchangeable record of data. The applications are literally everywhere.
You know, every single day we put our trust in countless pieces of digital information. We download software, we send messages, we check our bank accounts. But how do we really know that what we're seeing is the real deal? That it's completely untouched and authentic? Well, the answer's pretty fascinating, and it lies in how the internet itself proves something is genuine. It really all boils down to that one question. How does the internet prove something is authentic? How can you be absolutely sure that the file you just downloaded is the exact same one the developer uploaded without a single bit being changed along the way? The answer starts with something that acts kind of like a digital fingerprint. So just take a look at this. This is what happens when you make the tiniest change to some data. On the left, you've got the input 1, 2, 3, and it produces this unique string of characters. But look on the right. Just by changing it to 1, 2, 4, one single digit, you get a result that is completely, wildly different. It's not even close. This incredible sensitivity to change is the absolute core of our first big concept. And this powerful idea is the foundation of a process called hashing. Honestly, the best way to think about it is as a unique, almost unforgeable digital fingerprint for any piece of data out there. So, here's the crucial part. Hashing takes your data. It could be a simple password, a whole document, or even an entire software program, and it runs it through this complex mathematical blender to spit out a unique code. We call that code a hash, and if even one tiny thing changes in the original data, that hash code changes completely. It's totally different. This is exactly how we check for integrity and authenticity online.
And this isn't just theory. It has real-world consequences. This quote perfectly illustrates why it matters. A user shared the story about updating a network switch. They downloaded the new software, but they just didn't bother to check the hash value, the one the manufacturer provides. Turns out, the file had been corrupted during the download. The switch crashed, and it took hours of painful work to fix, all because a super simple hash check was skipped.
Okay, but here's the catch. Think about it. A fingerprint proves who you are, but it doesn't keep your conversations private. In the same way, a hash proves a file is authentic, but it doesn't hide what's inside it. Anyone can see the contents. So, how do we actually keep our data secret? Well, that brings us to the next level of security, the art of secret messages, or as it's more formally known, cryptography. Cryptography is the science of secure communication. This is not about proving that data is authentic anymore. This is all about making it completely unreadable to anyone who isn't supposed to see it. It's all about privacy. And it works through a really neat two-step process. First up is encryption. This takes your readable data, what we call plain text, and scrambles it into an unreadable mess called ciphertext. Then you have decryption, which takes that scrambled ciphertext and turns it back into the original readable plain text. And the magic ingredient that makes this whole thing possible? Something called keys. Now, the first and most straightforward approach to this is just to use a single key, one key that can both lock and unlock all of your information. This is called symmetric key cryptography, and it's just like your house key, right? One single shared secret key is used to both lock or encrypt the data and then unlock or decrypt it. The person sending the message and the person receiving it have to have the exact same key. Now, the big advantage here is speed. I mean, it is incredibly fast. But the disadvantage, oh, it's a huge one. How do you get that shared secret key to the other person securely in the first place? Because if that key is ever intercepted or stolen, your entire system is broken. It's a major security risk. So to solve that massive problem of how to share a key securely, cryptographers came up with a much more elegant approach, the two-key solution. This is asymmetric key cryptography, and it's a total game changer. In this system, everyone gets a pair of keys that are mathematically linked together. One is your public key, which you can share with absolutely anyone. You can post it on your website, you can shout it from the rooftops. The other is your private key. This one you have to guard with your life and never ever share. And here's how it works. It's brilliant. If I want to send you a secret message, I just find your public key, which is freely available, and I use that to encrypt my message. Now that scrambled message can only be decrypted by one thing in the entire universe, your corresponding private key. Pretty cool, right? So let's compare them real quick. On one side, you've got symmetric, one key, lightning fast, but it's risky because you have to share that key. On the other side, you've got asymmetric, two keys. Yeah, it's a lot slower, but the security is incredibly high because that precious private key is never shared. It never leaves your possession. So what does all this theory mean in practice? Where do we actually see these powerful ideas at work today?
Well, a perfect example is blockchain. The entire security and trust model of technologies like Bitcoin is built on this foundation of asymmetric key cryptography. It's what allows for secure, decentralized transactions without needing a central bank. Every single transaction is mathematically signed and verified using these public and private key pairs. So to wrap this all up, just remember these key things. Hashing is like that digital fingerprint, and it's used to check if your data is authentic and hasn't been messed with. For keeping things secret, we use cryptography. Symmetric keys are the fast, single-key method, but they're risky. And asymmetric keys are the slower but much more secure two-key solution that really powers so much of our modern digital world. And that brings us to a final thought. So much of our digital trust, from our banking to our communications to digital currencies, is built on the mathematical complexity of these keys. So it leaves us with a really critical question for the future. What happens when a machine becomes powerful enough to actually break them?
You've probably signed something digitally this week, right? Maybe even today. But what if I told you that what you think is a digital signature, that little picture of your handwriting, is not the real deal at all? Nope. The real technology is way more interesting and a whole lot more secure. So let's dive in and uncover the hidden power of a true digital signature.
Okay, so first things first, let's get clear on what we're not talking about. The traditional signature on paper, it feels personal, sure, but its biggest weakness has always been forgery. A real digital signature is the total opposite. It's built on a foundation of cryptography, which makes it, well, pretty much impossible to fake. It's like a lock that just can't be picked.
So a digital signature isn't just a scribble that says who you are, it's a powerful guarantee. It's verifiable proof that a document is authentic and can be trusted, period. You can think of it like a digital seal of approval, a promise that's literally baked right into the data itself.
And that brings us right to the core of how this whole thing works. A true digital signature actually makes three fundamental promises. These are the pillars that give it all of its strength and reliability.
And those three pillars are integrity, authentication, and non-reputation. Now, I know, they might sound a bit technical, But the ideas behind them are actually super simple and incredibly powerful. Let's break each one down.
First up, we've got integrity. This is simple. It just means that the document you received is the exact same document that was sent. Not a single word, not a comma, not one pixel has been changed along the way. It's a guarantee that the message is totally pristine and unaltered.
Next, there's authentication. This answers the most important question, right? Who really sent this? A digital signature proves, without a doubt, the origin of the document. It confirms that the person who claims to have signed it is, in fact, the person who actually signed it. No imposters.
And finally, non-repudiation. This is the one that's legally binding. This is the part that prevents the sender from turning around later and saying, I never sent that, or, nope, that's not my signature. Once it's signed, it's signed. There's just no denying it.
So those are the promises. Pretty solid, right? But how does the technology actually make them happen? Let's go behind the scenes and see how the sender creates this unique, unforgeable digital fingerprint for a document.
So yeah, how do you create something so secure? It's a great question, and the answer is this really clever two-step process that involves something called hashing and encryption.
Here's how it works on the sender's end. First, the document data gets put through a process called hashing. You can think of it like putting the document through a digital blender that creates a totally unique code. That's our digital fingerprint. Then, that unique code gets locked up using the sender's private key, a secret key that only they have. And that locked up code, that is the digital signature.
Okay, now let's flip the coin. The signature has been created and it's been sent along with the document. How can the person who receives it be absolutely 100% certain that it's legit? Well, this is where the magic of verification comes in.
The recipient just follows a simple three-step check. First, they use the sender's public key, which is available to everyone, to unlock the signature. This reveals the original fingerprint, let's call it hash 1. Second, they take the document they just received and run it through the exact same hashing process to create a brand new fingerprint, which we'll call hash 2.
And here it is, the moment of truth. The recipient just compares the two hashes. If hash 1 and hash 2 are a perfect match, it is absolute proof of all three promises. The document hasn't been touched. That's integrity. It came from the real sender, authentication, and they can't deny it, non-repudiation. But if they don't match, the alarm bells go off. Something's been tampered with. It's that simple and that brilliant.
So we've covered the what and the how. But what about the why? I mean, why does any of this matter in our day-to-day lives? Well, the impact is actually a lot bigger than you might think.
Get this, some studies show that digital signatures save the average person 1 full week of time every single year. A whole week. That's time you're not spending printing, signing, scanning, and mailing things. It's practically enough time for a vacation that you just got back.
And if you look at the world of business, the impact is even more dramatic. I mean, this quote really says it all. Deals can be closed in minutes, not weeks. The ability to securely handle contracts and agreements almost instantly is a total game changer for how business gets done.
And the benefits just keep coming. Think about it. You can sign a critical document from a cafe halfway across the world. You can authorize a bank transfer securely from your phone while you're on a bus. And on a global scale, we're saving mountains of paper. It's a win for business, a win for you, and honestly, a win for the planet.
So you see, the digital signature is so much more than just a convenience. It's a fundamental shift in how we establish trust in our digital world. It's faster, it's way more secure, and it's so much more efficient. And it really makes you wonder, what other parts of our old paper-based world are just waiting for their own digital transformation?
All right, we're about to dive into a piece of math from the 1600s that, believe it or not, quietly runs our entire digital world. Now, I know the concept might sound a little intimidating at first, but the core idea? It's actually surprisingly simple. So let's get right into it.
Okay, take a close look at these two numbers on your screen. At a glance, they look pretty much identical, right? Can you spot the difference? It's just one extra zero. But man, trying to actually count them is a genuine pain. And hey, if you feel a little bit of a headache coming on just from trying to compare those two, you are definitely not alone. Our brains just aren't wired to intuitively grasp numbers with that many decimal places. Luckily for us, there's a mathematical tool designed for this exact problem, the logarithm.
So before we can really appreciate just how elegant this solution is, we have to get a feel for the problem itself. Let's call this first part A pain in the numbers, because honestly, that's exactly what it feels like when you're dealing with these huge or, microscopic values.
So, what is a logarithm when you get right down to it? Well, it's really just a tool. It answers one simple question. What power do I need to raise a base number 2 to get another number? That's it. Seriously. The whole thing is about finding that one missing exponent. Okay, so to really get a handle on this tool, we got to look at where it came from. And it turns out the key to logarithms is understanding that they're just the inverse, the complete opposite, of a concept we're probably all a bit more familiar with, exponents. And this idea, it's far from new. It was publicly announced way back in 1614 to solve that exact pain in the numbers for people like astronomers and navigators. I mean, they needed a shortcut for these massive calculations, and logarithms were the answer. And what's really incredible is that the same fundamental idea is now totally essential for things like modern computer science and blockchain.
To really nail this down, let's just look at a super basic example. 2 to the power of 3. All that means is you multiply 2 by itself 3 times. 2 times 2 times 2, which gives you 8. Simple enough, right?
Okay, let's quickly define our terms here because they're going to be super important. The number we're multiplying, the 2, that's the base. The number of times we multiply it, the 3, that's the exponent. And the final result, the 8, is the product. So just remember those 3 parts: base, exponent, and product.
And this right here, this gets to the absolute core difference. With an exponential, you start with the base and the exponent, and your job is to find the final product. But with a logarithm, it's the exact opposite. You already have the base and the product, and your goal is to figure out that missing exponent. They are perfect mirror images of each other.
Okay, and this is where our story takes a really fascinating turn. You'd think, right, that if one operation is just the reverse of the other, they'd be about the same level of difficulty. But they're not. And that imbalance, the fact that it's easy to do one way but hard to undo, that's not a flaw, that's the entire secret.
And that leads us to this absolutely crucial idea. For certain things, especially in modern computing and security, we actively needed a process that was simple to calculate in one direction, but incredibly difficult to reverse.
Now look, with our little example, finding that exponent isn't hard at all. If I ask you, hey, what power do you raise 2 to get 8, you can figure out it's 3 pretty fast. So in this case, the reversal is easy.
But what happens when the numbers get massive? This is the moment a simple math problem completely transforms into the lock and key for the entire digital world. It creates something that we call a one-way function. This incredible difficulty actually has a name. It's called the discrete logarithm problem. It's the exact same challenge we've been talking about, finding that missing exponent, but on a scale that is just almost incomprehensibly large. We're way beyond simple trial and error here.
A good way to think about it is like mixing paint. It's super easy to take blue paint and yellow paint and mix them together to get green, but trying to unmix that green paint to perfectly separate it back into the original blue and yellow, it's pretty much impossible. That's a one-way function.
So, just how hard are we really talking here? Forget about numbers like 2 and 8. I want you to imagine the numbers involved in the calculation are not only prime numbers, but they're also hundreds of digits long.
So, how long do you think it would take a computer to reverse that math and find the original exponent? The answer is just staggering. We are talking about thousands of years.
And listen, that's not with your home computer. That's how long it would take to brute force the answer, even if you had every single computer on Earth working together on this one problem. It is, for all practical purposes, impossible. And that near impossibility, that is the key. That's how this 400-year-old mathematical idea is now being used to secure our future, to protect your most sensitive information every single day.
So let's trace this incredible journey one last time, okay? You have a mathematical shortcut from the 1600s. It turns out that shortcut is incredibly difficult to reverse when you use huge numbers. That difficulty gives us what we call a one-way function. And that one-way function is the fundamental digital lock that secures everything from your online banking to modern blockchain technology.
I mean, it's just an amazing example of how an old idea can find a completely revolutionary new purpose centuries down the line. And it really leaves you with a fascinating question, doesn't it?
What other ancient ideas are hiding in plain sight right now, powering the technology of our modern world?
You know, for as long as people have had secrets, they've had this one giant paradox. To share a secret message, you first have to share the secret key. But how do you send that key without someone else grabbing it first? For centuries, this was the unsolvable problem in cryptography. So today, let's break down the absolutely brilliant and kind of simple solution that changed everything. I mean, this is the fundamental challenge, right? Let's picture it. You want to send a locked treasure chest to a friend, but you can't just mail them the key separately because, an eavesdropper's just going to grab it. So how does your friend ever open the box? It's a simple puzzle, but it's stumped the greatest minds in cryptography for hundreds of years.
For the longest time, encryption was all about hiding the key. And honestly, that was its biggest weakness. But then, in 1976, these two researchers, Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman, they published this absolutely revolutionary paper. Their solution was just mind-bending. They said, what if instead of hiding a key, you could find a way for two people to create one together right out in the open for everyone to see?
Okay, so to see how this works, we need to meet our cast of characters. Think of them like the three classic players in any good spy story. Their goals are pretty simple, but their battle of wits, well, that's at the heart of all modern encryption.
So first up, we've got Alice and Bob. They just want to share a secret. Simple enough. But watching their every move is Eve, our eavesdropper. She is listening to every single message they send. If they try to just pass a key back and forth, boom, Eve snatches it and their secrets are toast.
So, the big question is, how do Alice and Bob outsmart Eve? This is where the genius of the Diffie-Hellman exchange comes in. It's like they perform this mathematical magic trick where everything they share publicly is, on its own, completely useless. Let's walk through exactly how they pull this off.
All right, step one. Alice and Bob agree on two numbers right out in the open. I mean, anyone can see them, including Eve. They choose what's called a prime modulus. Just think of it like the size of a clock face. In our example, it's 17. Then they pick a generator, which is a number that can kind of cycle through all the other numbers on that clock. Here, it's 3. So Eve sees 17 and 3. But these aren't the secret. They're just the public rules of the game.
Okay, now here's where it gets interesting. Alice secretly, privately, picks her own number. Let's say she chooses 15. She then does a little calculation using those public numbers. She takes 3 to the power of her secret 15 on that 17-hour clock. The answer she gets is 6. So she sends this result, just the number 6, publicly over to Bob. Now Eve sees the 6, but she has no idea about the secret number 15 that created it. That stays hidden. And Bob, he does the exact same thing. He secretly picks his own private number, we'll say 13. He runs the same kind of calculation, 3 to the power of his secret 13 on that 17-hour clock, and he gets 12. He sends that 12 back to Alice, right out in the open. So now Eve has the 12, but she's still missing Bob's secret ingredient, that number 13. Okay, let's just pause for a second and see what Eve has. She saw the public starting numbers, 3 and 17, and she intercepted the two results that were sent back and forth, the 6 and the 12. So she has some pieces of the puzzle, right? But she's missing the most crucial parts, Alice's secret number 15 and Bob's secret number 13. And now for the magic trick. Using only the numbers they just exchanged in public, Alice and Bob can now both completely independently calculate the exact same secret key. And Eve, she's about to be left completely in the dark. So check this out. Alice takes Bob's public number, that 12 he sent her, and raises it to the power of her own secret number, 15. Her result is 10. At the exact same time, Bob takes Alice's public number, the 6 she sent him, and raises it to the power of his secret number, 13. And what's his result? It's also 10. It's amazing. Without ever sharing their private numbers, they have both arrived at the exact same secret key.
There's a great way to put it. They have done the same calculation, even though it does not seem like it at first. It's so true. It looks like they did two totally different things, but when you look at the math, they were doing the exact same thing. They just got to the final answer from opposite directions.
So you might be wondering, how in the world does that work? Let's pop the hood for a second. Remember that number 12 Bob sent? It was really just a stand-in for 3 to the power of 13. So when Alice took that 12 and raised it to her secret 15, what she was really calculating was 3 to the power of 13 to the power of 15. And Bob,
He was doing the exact reverse, 3 to the power of 15 to the power of 13. And thanks to a basic rule of exponents you might remember from math class, those two calculations are absolutely identical.
So why can't Eve just figure this out? Well, the whole thing is protected by something called the discrete logarithm problem. You can think of it as a one-way function. It's super easy to go forward, to take 3, raise it to the power of 15, and get 6. But it is incredibly, incredibly hard to go backward, to look at the number 6 and figure out that the secret exponent that got you there was 15. And when you use the absolutely massive numbers that real-world encryption uses, it's not just hard, it's practically impossible.
So yeah, this isn't just some clever thought experiment. This one concept completely revolutionized how we think about security and privacy, especially online. And just think about it. This entire concept, the thing that underpins basically our entire secure internet, came from a single paper published by Diffie and Hellman way back in 1976. It was a theoretical breakthrough that literally made everything from online banking to secure private messaging possible. I mean, the impact was just enormous. The Diffie-Hellman key exchange finally solved that ancient, centuries-old problem of sharing a secret. It gave us a way for two people to agree on a secret key even when a third person is listening to every single thing they say. And that one idea, it became the foundation for pretty much all of the modern encryption that protects our digital lives every single day.
And that leaves us with one final thought. This system has been the bedrock of our security for decades. But now, the rise of quantum computing threatens to break these one-way functions that make it all work. So it raises a huge question. As technology keeps evolving, what is the next great leap in keeping secrets going to look like? So what really keeps your digital life secure? I mean, it's not just about having a long password, right? It's this elegant, almost invisible field of mathematics working in the background. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on elliptic curve cryptography, the silent guardian that protects pretty much everything, from your private messages all the way to Bitcoin itself. Yeah, the source material really just nails it with this quote. The whole system, the entire thing, is built on a really simple idea. Some math problems are incredibly easy to do one way, but are practically impossible to reverse. And when we say impossible, we're not just talking difficult. We mean computationally infeasible. That's a fancy way of saying even the world's most powerful supercomputers would take longer than the age of the universe to crack it. And this near-perfect one-way security is the absolute backbone of elliptic curve cryptography, or ECC for short. It's what's securing every single Bitcoin transaction, and it's way, way stronger than a lot of the older cryptographic methods. So how on earth does it work? Well, the entire secret lies in one very special shape. All right, so to understand the lock, we first have to understand the keyhole. The entire foundation of ECC is built on this unique mathematical playing field known as an elliptic curve. Now, it might look kind of simple, but its hidden properties are what make this whole system possible. Okay, don't let the algebra scare you off here. You do not need to solve this equation, I promise. The only thing you need to know is that this formula creates a very specific symmetrical curve. Just think of it like our game board. This is the arena where all the cryptographic action is going to happen. And this is where things get really, really weird and fun. On this special curve, the rules of math that you learned back in school, they get completely thrown out the window. To get ECC, we have to forget what we know about plus and times and learn a completely new visual way of doing things. So, how in the world do you do math on a shape? Well, you forget about crunching numbers. Instead, you start thinking in terms of points, lines, and reflections. Let's start with something that should be simple: addition. Let's just walk through it together. First, you see those 2 points on the curve, A and B? You just pick them. Step 2. You draw a straight line connecting them. Simple enough. That line is going to hit the curve at a third spot. Then you take that intersection point and just flip it, reflect it right across the horizontal x-axis. And voila, that final destination, that's point C. In this strange new world, that's what A plus B equals. It's all just geometry. Okay, that makes sense for 2 different points, but what if you want to add a point to itself? I mean, how do you draw a line through a single point? This question is actually the key to understanding how multiplication works in ECC. So instead of a line through 2 points,
You draw what's called a tangent line. It just barely skims the curve at that one single point, A. And just like before, you find where that line intersects the curve again, you reflect it across the axis, and there's your new point. This is called point doubling. Now imagine doing this over and over and over again. That's multiplication. And each time you do it, the result leaps to a seemingly random, completely unpredictable new spot on the curve. That chaotic jumping is the secret sauce.
Now you might be asking, why go through all this trouble? Why this strange roundabout way of multiplying? Well, this is where the genius of the whole system comes into play. This jumping around creates a perfect mathematical one-way street.
This slide just lays it out perfectly. Look, in normal math, if I say, hey, 5 times something equals 10, you know the answer is 2 instantly. Reversing it is easy. But in curve math, if I give you the starting point A and the final point C, and then I ask you, hey, how many jumps did it take to get there? You can't just work backward. There's no such thing as simple division here.
This challenge, it actually has a formal name, the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem. And it's one of the hardest nuts to crack in all of modern mathematics. It's what we call a trapdoor function. It's super easy to fall through one way by multiplying, but it is absolutely impossible to climb back out and figure out how you got there.
The only way to solve it is brute force. You'd literally have to start at point A and just keep multiplying, calculating 2A, then 3A, then 4A, and you'd have to keep doing that, maybe for trillions and trillions of steps, until you just happen to randomly land on point C. With the huge numbers used in real cryptography, it is a truly impossible task.
Okay, so we have this abstract math, these one-way streets. How does this actually build the digital locks that we use every single day? Let's connect the dots between this weird math problem and the public and private keys that form the foundation of all modern cryptography.
It's actually so elegant and simple when you see it laid out. Your private key, that's just the secret number. The number of times you decided to jump or multiply from the starting point. It's your secret. And the public key, that's just the final destination on the curve after all those jumps are done. So it's super easy for you to take your private key and generate your public key. But because of that one-way street problem, it's impossible for anyone to take your public key and figure out what your private key was.
And this exact system is what's running under the hood for every single transaction on the Bitcoin network. When you send Bitcoin, you're using your private key to prove you own the funds, and everyone else can use your public key to verify that it was really you who sent it without ever being able to discover your secret.
So this elegant, almost playful geometric game creates one of the strongest locks that we have ever known. It is, for all practical purposes, unbreakable. But that leads us to a final, really crucial question. It's unbreakable for now. What happens to our secure digital world on the day that's no longer true?
You know, every single day, we're all using these invisible codes that literally run our digital world, and we probably don't even think about it. Every email, every photo, every crypto transaction, it all relies on a secret language. So today, let's pull back the curtain and actually decode it.
Okay, so what in the world could a simple greeting like hello possibly have in common with a super long, complex Bitcoin address? I know, it sounds kind of like a riddle, right? But the answer is actually fascinating. It's a hidden language, a really clever translation system that lets our human world talk to the world of machines.
See, here's the fundamental problem we had to solve. Computers don't get us. They don't understand letters or pictures or sounds. Nope. They live in a world of pure numbers. That's it. So for us to communicate with them at all, we needed some kind of translator, a standard way to turn everything we do into a numerical format they can actually understand.
And the first huge breakthrough in solving this was a system called ASCII. The easiest way to think about it, it was the very first standardized alphabet, the ABCs, but made specifically for computers. And it was an absolute game changer.
So ASCII, which by the way stands for American Standard Code for Information Interchange, is basically a big chart. Every English letter, every number, every punctuation mark gets assigned its own unique number between 0 and 127. This was standardized by IANA, the same organization that manages things like IP addresses. It was this revolutionary idea that finally let different computers talk to each other and understand text in the exact same way.
Let's see it in action. It's actually really straightforward. You take a word like hello. To a computer that speaks ASCII, it's not a word at all. It's just a sequence of numbers, 72, then 101, 108, another 108, and finally 111. Each number maps perfectly to one letter. Simple as that.
But this is where you see just how literal and precise computers are. Hello with a capital H starts with the number 72. But if you write hello with a lowercase h, it starts with 104. To us, it's the same word, but to the computer, those are two completely different sequences of numbers, which means they are two completely different things.
Okay, so ASCII was fantastic for text, no doubt, but our digital lives are way more than just text, right? So how do we handle things like pictures, or audio files, or video? How do you send an email with a photo attached? You can't use ASCII for that.
Well, that's where a much more powerful system comes into play, Base 64. If ASCII is the alphabet, then Base 64 is the universal translator. It's designed to take any kind of data, an image file, a song, you name it, and wrap it up in a safe, text-based format.
Now, you might be wondering, why do we even have to do that? Well, a lot of systems, especially older ones like email, were only built to handle simple text. They get confused if you try to send the raw data of an image through them. It could get scrambled and corrupted. So Base 64 acts like a protective package, wrapping that complex data in a simple text-only shell to make sure it gets to the other side completely intact.
And it pulls off this magic trick using a very specific and limited toolkit, just 64 characters. You've got all the uppercase and lowercase letters, the numbers 0 through 9, and then two special symbols, the plus sign and the slash. That's it. That's all it needs to encode anything.
Okay, so things get even more interesting when we jump into the world of cryptocurrency. Bitcoin needed a system to represent those long, complicated addresses, but it had a problem that Base 64 never really considered. Us, humans, we make mistakes. And that led to the creation of Base 58, a smarter, specialized version of this code.
Now, if you put them side by side, they look pretty similar. Base 58 starts with the same idea as Base 64, but it makes some really smart, deliberate changes. And the most important part isn't what it includes, it's what it removes, and more importantly, why it removes it.
And this is it's so clever. It all comes down to user-friendliness. Base 58 gets rid of the number 0 and the capital letter O because, come on, they look almost identical in a lot of fonts. Same thing for the capital I and the lowercase l. By removing these visually confusing characters, plus the plus and slash symbols, the system makes it so much harder for you to accidentally mistype a Bitcoin address, and that's a mistake that could be incredibly costly. So, let's just take a step back. We've gone from simple text to complex data, all the way to a code that's designed to be human-friendly. It might feel a little technical, but this whole evolution is the invisible foundation that supports pretty much everything we do online.
So let's recap that journey real quick. First, ASCII gave computers a way to read our language. Then, Base 64 gave them a way to handle all of our complex files safely. And finally, Base 58 took that idea and refined it for a really specific, high-stakes human interaction. You see, each step is an evolution, solving a new problem and making the bridge between our world and the digital world stronger.
In all of this progression, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? We went from encoding simple text to error-proofing currency addresses. As our data gets even more complex and interactive, think about VR, AR, the metaverse. What will the next secret language of data look like? What new problems is it going to have to solve for us?
You know that split second of panic you get right before you hit send on a money transfer? You're just staring at that super long account number, praying you didn't just type a 7 instead of a 1. Well, it turns out there's this hidden bit of math, kind of like a silent guardian, working behind the scenes to save us from exactly that. It's a really clever little thing called a checksum, and today we're going to pull back the curtain and see how it works.
So take a look at this. It's a British bank account number. If you were typing this in, how sure would you be that every single digit is perfect? Because one little slip up and your money could just, poof, vanish into the digital void, right? Well, actually, not so fast.
You see, a number like this has a secret baked right into its DNA. There's a built-in safety net, a really elegant little trick that's designed specifically to catch simple human errors. And this unsung hero of our digital world is called a checksum.
So what is it really? A checksum is just a small chunk of data that's calculated from a bigger chunk of data. Think of it like a mathematical fingerprint. A special little algorithm takes a look at the main string of numbers, does some quick math, and spits out this short value. That's the checksum, which then gets tacked right onto the original number.
Okay, let's go back to our bank number. The correct version of this account actually ends in 9268. See that 29 at the beginning?
That's our checksum, and it is not random. It was mathematically created using all the other numbers in the sequence, the 6116, the 1331, and that correct 9268. And here's the magic. Let's say you make a typo and enter 2968 by mistake. The second you hit enter, your bank's software temporarily ignores the 29 you typed and runs its own calculation on the rest of the numbers. Based on your typo, it calculates that the checksum should be 92. Then it compares its answer, 92, to the checksum that was provided, 29. And they don't match. The system immediately throws up a red flag, stops the transaction, and saves you from a massive headache. So simple, but so incredibly powerful. And this brilliant idea, it's not just for banking. This same basic principle of error checking is absolutely fundamental to our entire digital world, from government IDs all the way to the cutting edge of finance. So where else is this happening? Well, it's used in things like social security numbers to make sure data entry is right. And, this might surprise you, it is a core feature in cryptocurrency addresses. Yep, when you send Bitcoin, there's a checksum working in the background to make sure you didn't accidentally mistype one of the characters in that crazy long, complicated address. Now, hearing about crypto probably makes you think of another term you've heard a lot, hashing. It's actually really easy to get them mixed up, since they both involve crunching data to get a result. But they have very, very different jobs, and it's pretty important to know the difference. Here's an easy way to think about it. A checksum's whole purpose in life is to be simple and fast. It's designed to do a quick scan for typos in small bits of data, like our account number. A hash, on the other hand, has a much bigger, tougher job. It's designed to take massive amounts of data and create a totally unique digital fingerprint, which by design is a much slower and more complicated process. So this all brings us to a bigger, really interesting question. Why are things like crypto addresses so ridiculously long and complicated anyway? Well, it turns out the checksum is just one piece of a much larger, very thoughtful design puzzle, where every single part has a specific job to make sure everything is secure and, actually usable. It's actually built on 4 distinct layers. First, you've got our hero, error checking, using that checksum to catch typos. Then there's something called versioning. That's just a little prefix that tells a computer which blockchain this address belongs to. The third layer is all about readability, and this is so clever. They just remove characters that look alike, like a 0 and a capital O, to stop us from making mistakes. And finally, number 4 is size reduction. That's where they use hashing to shrink a giant public key down into a shorter, more manageable address. So when you boil it all down, the crucial point is this. The checksum is one of the most elegant, simple, and powerful ideas in computing. It's just a tiny little bit of math that acts as our first line of defense against the most common problem there is, plain old human error. From your bank to your Bitcoin wallet, it's quietly in the background, keeping your stuff safe. It's just a perfect example of the invisible logic that our entire digital world is built on. A simple checksum protects you from a slip of the finger. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other invisible math is out there silently protecting our data every single day? In the crypto world, everything feels so anonymous, right? Your address is just this long, random string of letters and numbers. But what if you could change that? What if it could be a brand? Today, we're diving into Bitcoin vanity addresses to figure out if they're a brilliant marketing tool or maybe a security nightmare just waiting to happen. Just imagine for a second, what if your Bitcoin address wasn't just random gibberish? What if it could start with your company's name or, just a word that you choose? That's the simple but really powerful idea behind a vanity address. So, what exactly is a vanity address? Well, the easiest way to think about it is like a personalized license plate for your car. You're taking something that's totally generic and making it uniquely, recognizably yours. Okay, so technically speaking, it's a public Bitcoin address where you've specifically chosen a custom prefix. So instead of just taking whatever random string the network spits out, you're forcing the system to generate one that starts with a word you actually want. All right, take a look at this. This is your typical standard Bitcoin address. It's a jumbled mess, isn't it? It's secure, for sure, but it is completely unmemorable. Impossible to read, really. Now, compare that to this one. See that? It starts with one car. The rest of it is still random, yeah? But that simple little prefix makes a huge difference. All of a sudden, it's not just a string of data, it's a brand.
There is one little catch, though. You can customize the part after the first character, but you can't change the very first one. Every single standard Bitcoin address has to start with the number 1. It's just part of the rules, a non-negotiable part of the protocol.
Okay, so it looks cool, but is it actually useful? And the answer is absolutely. There are some surprisingly practical reasons you might want to get one of these.
It really boils down to 3 main use cases. For businesses, it's a branding no-brainer. An address that starts with 1 car hire just looks way more professional and trustworthy. And for nonprofits or fundraisers, a custom address like 1 charity can build a ton of confidence and make it so much easier for people to double-check they're donating to the right place.
So, if these are so great, why isn't everyone using them? Well, here's the catch. You can't just type in the address you want. Creating one takes a staggering amount of computing power. It's basically a brute force lottery. Your computer is just generating and checking billions of random addresses every second, just hoping one of them starts with your prefix by pure dumb luck. And the difficulty just explodes with every single letter you add. A 3-letter prefix, your computer can probably crank that out in a few minutes. But add just 1 more letter to make it 4 characters, and you're suddenly looking at hours, or maybe even days of nonstop work as it just churns through trillions of possibilities.
And there's a ceiling. Right now, for an average person, generating a prefix that's longer than 6 or 7 characters is, well, it's pretty much impossible. The time it would take is measured in years. So that 10-letter custom address you were dreaming of, yeah, it's probably going to stay a dream for now.
Now, because it's so hard to generate these yourself, a lot of people turn to online services that promise to do all the heavy lifting for them. And this is where we hit our first big red flag. This can be incredibly dangerous.
So, can you trust these online generators? This is maybe the most important question you need to ask. Think of it this way. Your public address is like your bank account number. It's fine to share it. But creating that address also creates a private key. And that private key is like your password and your PIN all rolled into one. Whoever has that key has total control. So here's how these services usually work. The dangerous ones, they generate both your public address and your private key on their servers. What does that mean? It means they have a copy of your key and they can drain your wallet anytime they want. The only safe way to do this is with something called split key generation. It's a clever process where you and the service each generate half of the key, so neither of you ever has the full picture. If a service doesn't offer that, just stay away.
But okay, let's say you do everything right. You generate your address safely, there is still another risk, and this one is a lot more subtle. Impersonation. Just because an address has a familiar name in it does not mean it's legit.
The danger here is pretty simple, but it's scary. Anyone can create a vanity address, and that means a scammer can create one that looks almost identical to yours, just hoping to trick people into sending the money that was meant for you.
Here's how the scam plays out. A hacker sees your legitimate 1 charity address. They go and spend the time and computing power to generate a new one that looks almost the same, maybe 1 charity with an extra I or something. Then they post that fake address online and boom! Suddenly, donations that were supposed to go to you are going straight into their pocket.
So, it all comes down to this. Vanity addresses, they're a really powerful branding tool, no doubt, but they come with real risks. From shady generators to these clever impersonation scams, the question you have to ask yourself is, what's more important, the personalization or the protection? It's a trade-off that everyone in the crypto space really needs to think about.
What if you could spend the same dollar twice? I know, it sounds impossible with physical cash, but in the digital world, it was the one problem that stood in the way of creating real internet money. Today, we're diving deep into the double spending problem, a puzzle that honestly baffled computer scientists for decades.
Okay, let's start with a really simple question. We all know you can't just photocopy a real dollar bill and then go spend both of them, right? The copy is obviously a fake, and the original is unique. But what if your money wasn't physical at all? What if it was just a file on your computer?
And this gets right to the heart of the challenge. A physical dollar bill has scarcity built right in. It can only be in one place at one time. But a digital file, like a song or a photo, that can be copied perfectly, infinitely. So how in the world do you prevent someone from just copying and pasting their digital cash, basically printing money out of thin air?
This right here was the great digital money puzzle. For decades, some of the most brilliant minds in cryptography and computer science tried to create a purely electronic cash system, but they all kept running into the exact same wall.
You know, early attempts back in the 1980s with this thing called eCash were pretty clever. The idea was for banks to issue digital tokens, each with its own unique serial number, kind of like a digital dollar bill. But, and this is a huge but, there was a major catch. Every single time you wanted to spend one, you had to check back with the central bank to verify that that specific token hadn't already been spent.
And that catch? Well, it has a name: double spending. It's the risk that a single digital coin could be spent in two different places at once, and it's the fatal flaw that caused every early attempt at digital currency to fail. I mean, think about it. If you can't guarantee a dollar was only spent once, the entire system becomes totally worthless.
So what was the most obvious solution to this problem? Well, as it turns out, the first answer everyone came up with was also the system's greatest weakness: trust.
The idea was simple enough. Just have a central authority, a bank, a company, anyone, act as the official bookkeeper. They would watch every single transaction and give it their stamp of approval, making sure nobody cheated. Problem solved, right?
Well, not quite. The 2008 financial crisis was a brutal, worldwide lesson in what happens when that trust just evaporates. When giants like Lehman Brothers collapsed practically overnight, it proved that these trusted institutions could fail spectacularly, whether from mismanagement or just plain greed, shattering the very foundation the whole system was built on.
The really crucial point here is that putting one single entity in charge creates these massive vulnerabilities. They can freeze your funds without any due process, like when PayPal froze accounts belonging to WikiLeaks. They can limit your access to your own money, like the banks in Greece did during their 2015 debt crisis. And on top of all that, they charge fees just for the privilege of being the middleman, and they end up excluding billions of people who don't even have access to traditional banking in the first place.
So, all of this led to a seemingly impossible question. How could you possibly build a digital money system that works for everyone, everywhere, without anyone in control? How do you create trust without a trusteer?
The breakthrough came from a completely different direction. In 2008, a mysterious creator known only as Satoshi Nakamoto proposed this radical new idea. What if we replace the fragile concept of human trust with the cold, hard certainty of mathematical proof? And this was the genesis of Bitcoin. It was the first system in history to successfully solve the double spending problem without relying on any central bank or company to validate the transactions.
The technology that made this all possible is the blockchain. The easiest way to think of it is as a shared public ledger that everyone can see. So, when you make a transaction, it's broadcast to a global network of computers. These computers then compete to solve a really complex math problem to prove the transaction is legit. The winner gets to add it as a permanent, unchangeable block in the chain. And because the whole network agrees on the record, no single person can ever go back and alter.
But here's where the story gets even bigger. See, the solution to the double spending problem wasn't just about creating a new kind of money. It was about creating a whole new kind of internet. By creating a way to verify information without a central authority, blockchain provided a blueprint for redesigning basically any system that relies on a trusted middleman. I mean, imagine secure voting systems, or verifiable digital identities, or even notary services, all running on a network with no single point of failure and no one in control.
So the ultimate takeaway is this. Solving the double spending problem wasn't just some technical fix. It introduced a fundamentally new way for us to agree on what's true online, using verifiable proof instead of just relying on institutions. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question for the future. If money was just the first domino to fall, what's next?
Have you ever wondered what actually happens when you send money to someone? I mean, what if the record of every dollar you've ever spent wasn't locked away in some private bank vault, but was out in the open for everyone to see? Well, that's the wild idea we're going to unpack today, as we dig into the tale of two ledgers, the one that runs your bank and the one that powers crypto.
You know, this question really cuts to the heart of a huge shift in how we think about money and trust. For centuries, the answer was super simple: the bank. Some big, powerful institution that you just had to trust. But that's not the only game in town anymore, and the alternative is changing, well, just about everything. So let's start on familiar ground, with the system we all use every single day. This is the world of the centralized ledger, where for generations, banks have been the undisputed kings of record-keeping.
So, what even is a centralized ledger? Well, At its core, it's just a private database. The best way to think about it is like a bank's exclusive, heavily guarded logbook. They own it, they're the only ones who can write in it, and they hold the only key.
Think about it. When you pay a friend, you're not actually zapping digital cash over to them. Nope. You're really just sending a request to your bank, asking them to update their private logbook. So your bank makes a note, their bank makes a note, and here's the crucial part. The details of that transaction are completely private, living only within the digital walls of those two banks.
And that's really the bottom line for this whole system. It is a closed loop. If anyone else, say another company, a government agency, sometimes even you, wants to see the details, you have to ask for permission. The bank is the ultimate gatekeeper of your financial story.
But what if there was no gatekeeper? What if the ledger wasn't some private book in a vault, but more like a public monument for everyone to see and verify? Well, that brings us to the radical alternative, the distributed ledger.
So instead of one central database, I want you to imagine a kind of magic notebook. And this notebook is copied and shared among thousands, even millions, of computers all over the world. Whenever a new transaction happens, every single copy gets updated at the exact same time. That, right there, is the core idea of a distributed ledger.
And I mean, when you put them side by side, the contrast is just wow. It's night and day. We go from a single authority controlling everything on private servers to a system with no central authority that lives on a public network where every single person involved has their own copy. It completely flips the script on who has the power. And here's where it gets really mind-bending. This new kind of ledger can handle way more than just money. Sure, something like Bitcoin's ledger is built to track currency, but other platforms like Ethereum are designed to securely store almost any kind of digital info. We're talking about identity documents, patient records, even the deed to a house.
There's a quote from one of the sources that just hits the nail on the head. This whole concept of an open, shared public record book, it's the polar opposite of the closed, private system that's been running finance for centuries.
Okay, but it's not quite that simple. Just because a ledger is shared doesn't automatically mean it's a total free-for-all. It turns out there are a few different flavors, and the main difference comes down to one really important question: who's allowed in? First up, you've got the permissionless or public ledger. This is the model that things like Bitcoin and Ethereum use, and it's truly open. Anyone, anywhere in the world, can decide to join the network, download the entire transaction history, and start participating. No permission slip required. On the other hand, you have the permissioned or private ledger. Now, in this case, a central authority kind of comes back into the picture, but they act more like a bouncer at an exclusive club. They're the ones who decide who gets on the list and who gets permission to join the network and see the records. This is something you often see with a group of big companies who want to share data just among themselves.
So the real defining difference here just boils down to access control. A public ledger? No central gatekeeper. A private one? That authority is back. One is a truly open peer-to-peer network for literally anyone. The other is more like a members-only club where you need an invitation to get past the velvet rope.
So, we've talked about these incredible shared ledgers, but what do they actually look like under the hood? Well, the most famous type is, of course, a blockchain. And it gets its name from, you guessed it, how it's structured.
Just imagine a digital chain, but instead of metal links, it's made up of individual cryptographically sealed blocks. Each new block contains a new batch of transactions, and once it's added to the chain, it is cemented in place. It can't be changed, it can't be deleted, it's permanent.
Now, if we were to crack open one of these blocks, we'd find three main ingredients. There's a header, which has some technical data. There's a list of all the transactions that are being recorded. And then, most importantly, there's a reference hash. You can think of this like a unique, unforgeable digital fingerprint that links this block perfectly to the one that came right before it.
And that link, that little reference hash, that's the secret sauce. It's what weaves all the individual blocks into an unbreakable, unchangeable chain. See, if you tried to tamper with just one block, it would break the link to all the blocks that come after it, making any fraud instantly obvious to everyone on the network. Which brings us right back around to that big question from the beginning. In the old world, our trust was placed in an institution, working behind closed doors. In this new world, we're being asked to trust a system that lives right out in the open, a system built on code and consensus. So who are we really trusting? Well, maybe we're trusting each other, transparently. And that simple idea, that could change absolutely everything.
All right, today we're getting a front row seat to one of the most intense, high-stakes competitions happening 24/7 all around the world, the Great Blockchain Race. We're going to dive deep and figure out exactly how a new link gets forged in these incredible digital chains.
So, how does this whole thing actually work? I mean, how does a brand new set of transactions get locked into place, becoming a totally permanent part of the record? That's the big question we're going to tackle right now.
Okay, let's get into it. To really understand how a new link gets added, you first have to understand the chain itself. So let's start at the beginning with the unbreakable chain because, well, everything has to start somewhere, right?
And for every blockchain, that beginning is something called the genesis block. You can basically think of it as the Big Bang for that chain. It's block 0, the very first one ever made. Every single block that comes after it, no matter how many there are, can trace its history all the way back to this one single ancestor. And from that genesis block, the chain just starts growing, one block at a time, in perfect chronological order. Blocks 1 links back to block 0, then block 2 links to block 1, block 3 links to block 2, and on it goes, creating this ever-expanding, unbreakable digital chain. So now that we have a picture of the chain, let's talk about how it's actually built. And this is where the action really heats up. Welcome to the miners' great race. This is the all-out global competition to be the one who gets to add the very next block. So who are these racers? Well, they're called miners. But forget pickaxes and hard hats. These are highly specialized computer systems, or nodes, all over the world. Their job is to be the official record keepers, and they are all in a constant, furious race to create that next block. Now, before the starting gun even fires, every single miner has to get prepared. First, they're listening to the network, grabbing all the latest transactions flying around. Second, they create a very special transaction just for themselves. And third, they bundle all of that stuff together to form their own candidate for the next block. But that second step, that's where things get really cool. It's called the Coinbase transaction. This is a totally unique transaction that lets the miner literally pay themselves the block reward. So get this, it's not just a prize for winning. This is the very mechanism that creates new cryptocurrency. It's how new coins are literally born and put into circulation. So what fuels this massive worldwide race? It's all about the economics. You've got the block reward, which for Bitcoin famously gets cut in half about every 4 years. On top of that, miners also collect all the transaction fees that users pay. The whole system is brilliantly designed to lead to a hard cap on the supply. For Bitcoin, a max of 21 million will ever exist, and that's it, by around the year 2140.
But not all of these races are run at the same speed. For Bitcoin, a new block gets added to the chain, on average, every 10 minutes. Now, compare that to Ethereum, where a new block is created roughly every 17 seconds. It's the same fundamental race, just happening at a wildly different pace.
Okay, so all the miners have gathered the transactions, they've built their blocks, and now it's time for the final frantic sprint to the finish line. It's time for solving the crypto puzzle. I mean, think about it. You've got potentially thousands of miners all over the globe competing at the exact same moment. So how does just one of them win? What exactly is the finish line in this crazy digital race? And this is where the design is it's beautiful. A miner wins by being the very first one to solve an incredibly difficult mathematical problem, what's known as a hash puzzle. They're all crunching numbers, burning electricity, trying to find the solution. And victory goes to whoever finds it first. Simple as that. But with so many competitors running so fast, what happens when the race is a dead heat, when it's too close to call? Well, that brings us to the most dramatic moment in our story, a fork in the road. And listen, this isn't some rare thing. It actually happens pretty regularly. You get two miners, maybe on opposite sides of the planet, who both solve that puzzle at almost the exact same instant. They both shout "I won" to the network. So what gives? How does the network handle a photo finish? This situation creates what's called a blockchain fork. It's like the timeline splits. For a little while, you don't have one single chain anymore. You have two valid competing chains, each with a different version of that newest block. Both are technically correct, which is a big problem. So when this happens, the network of other miners temporarily splits its allegiance. Some of them will see the block from fork A first and start building the next block on top of that one. Let's say 70% of them do. The other 30% might see fork B first and start building on that chain instead. For a moment, the network is literally divided.
So how does this mess get resolved? How does the network come back together? Well, the solution is so simple and so elegant, and the best part is nobody's in charge of making the decision. It all comes down to this: the longest chain wins. The entire network reaches an agreement or consensus by following one simple, unbreakable rule. Whichever of those two forks gets the next block added to it first, making it longer than the other one, that one becomes the official one true chain, and the other one? It just gets abandoned.
And let me tell you, the stakes in this outcome are absolutely enormous. The miner whose block ended up on that winning, longest chain, they get their block added to the permanent record, and they collect the entire block reward plus all those transaction fees. But the miner on the shorter chain, their block becomes what's called orphaned. It's discarded by the network. They get nothing, absolutely zero for all that work. It is a true winner-take-all outcome. So when you step back and look at it, this entire incredible system of security and truth is built on a foundation of pure, raw, decentralized competition. And that leaves us with one final crucial question to think about. In a race with such incredibly high stakes, what is it that guarantees that thousands of competing miners all play by the rules? The answer, and this is the true genius of it, is buried right in the design of those economic incentives we just saw.
You know, every single day, billions of dollars are zipping across blockchains, and developers are constantly trying to build the next big thing on top of them. But have you ever stopped to wonder, how do they do all that without, breaking everything? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the secret digital sandboxes that make it all possible. Okay, so let's just dive right into the core challenge here. A major blockchain, it isn't like a regular website that you can just take down for a few hours for maintenance. Nope, it's a live 24/7 global network. It literally never sleeps. And that creates a massive problem for anyone who's trying to build or upgrade it. To really get a sense of that scale, let's take a look at Bitcoin. I mean, even way back in mid-2020, it was already processing close to 150,000 transactions every single day. And of course, that number has only gone up since then. So what does that actually look like? Well, it breaks down to almost 2 transactions happening every single second. Just try to picture that for a moment, a constant, relentless flow of data and value circling the globe that absolutely cannot be stopped.
And this, right here, creates this huge dilemma. If you're a developer, how on earth are you supposed to test your new app? How do you roll out critical upgrades to the system? How do you build on a live network when just one tiny little mistake could unleash total chaos?
Well, the answer is just brilliantly simple. You don't. You just don't do it on the live network. Instead, developers use what's basically a digital sandbox, a totally safe place to build, to test, and to try and break things without any real-world consequences. And this is where the testnet comes into play. Now, to really understand what a testnet is, we first have to talk about its counterpart, the mainnet. The easiest way to think of the mainnet is that it's the real deal. It's the live, public blockchain. It's where every transaction has real financial value and where mistakes have very real, very expensive consequences. And here is its opposite. A testnet is kind of like a parallel universe. It's an identical copy of the mainnet software. Everything works exactly the same way, but, and this is the crucial part, the coins are completely, totally worthless. It's literally a playground for developers. This slide just drives the point home perfectly. The mainnet is the living, breathing city, right? It's got real traffic, real people, and real consequences. The testnet, on the other hand, is the architect's model. It's the blueprint, where you can try out the most radical new designs and find every single flaw before a single brick ever gets laid in the real world.
So we've got this amazing concept of a digital sandbox, but it turns out not all sandboxes are created equal. The different design choices made by blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, well, they have some pretty massive implications for developers and for you, the user.
Okay, now this table shows a really critical difference in design. On Bitcoin, testnet addresses actually look different from mainnet addresses. See how they start with an M or an N? This makes it physically impossible to accidentally send your real valuable Bitcoin to a worthless test address. But Ethereum uses the exact same address format for both. And this creates a really dangerous situation where a simple copy-paste mistake could send your real Ether into a test environment where it could just be lost forever. You have to be so careful. This all leads to a pretty logical question, right?
If testnet coins have zero value and you can't just go out and buy them, then how do developers get their hands on the play money they need to pay for test transaction fees and actually use the sandbox?
The answer is this really clever little tool called a faucet. And yeah, as the name suggests, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's a website that just dispenses small amounts of these testnet coins, giving developers just enough to get started without flooding the system with worthless tokens.
Probably the best analogy for it is a free ATM, but for digital play money. It's that simple. A developer just goes to the faucet's website, they pop in their testnet wallet address, maybe they solve a quick little puzzle to prove they're human, and bam, a small amount of digital play money gets sent over so they can start their work.
And the process itself is incredibly simple, as you can see from these steps. First, you just create a wallet on the testnet to get an address. Second, you go find a faucet website for that specific blockchain. Third, you'll probably complete a small task like a captcha or something. And finally, the faucet sends those free test coins right to your wallet and you are good to go. You can start building.
So, let's just quickly recap the key takeaways here. The mainnet is where the real money is, where the stakes are high. The testnet is that all-important sandbox that allows for totally risk-free innovation. And faucets are the simple but absolutely essential tools that give developers the play money they need to build and test safely. All of this works together to make sure the main network stays stable and secure for all of us.
And that really brings us to a final thought. A testnet gives people a space for pure creation, totally free from financial risk. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If you had a perfect digital sandbox for anything in your life, with no cost and zero consequences for failure, what would you be inspired to build?
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into one of the most important, but let's be honest, kind of confusing upgrades in Bitcoin's entire history, segregated witness, or as pretty much everyone calls it, SegWit. Now, it sounds super technical, right? But stick with me because it's actually an incredibly clever fix for a really simple problem.
And that problem boils down to this question. Imagine you want to buy a $1 coffee, but the fee to actually make the payment is another 30 cents. That's just nuts, right? Well, for a while there, that's exactly the kind of crazy situation the Bitcoin network was in. So what on earth was going on? And the culprit, the source of all this headache? This one little number, 1 megabyte. That was the strict size limit for every new block of transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, that limit was put there for good reasons, to keep the network decentralized, to stop spam. But as Bitcoin got more popular, that tiny bit of space started causing a massive, massive bottleneck.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at that traffic jam I mentioned. Then we'll get into the brilliant solution, SegWit. We'll see how it actually works by separating signatures, then uncover a surprise flaw it fixed. And finally, we'll see why it's so incredibly important for Bitcoin's future. Let's get into it.
All right, first up, the problem. As more and more people started jumping into Bitcoin, the network basically turned into a highway at rush hour. You know the scene. Totally congested, super slow, and suddenly really, really expensive to use. So here's a good way to think about it. Imagine each Bitcoin block is like a bus, and it only has enough seats for 1 megabyte of passengers, or, transactions. When the network gets busy, it's like everyone's trying to get on the bus at the same time. The bus fills up instantly, and this huge line starts to form. And if you want a guaranteed spot on the next bus, what do? You start waving more money around, right? You outbid the other people in line. That is exactly what was happening. A crazy bidding war just to get a simple payment through. So yeah, this whole scaling thing had to be fixed. But instead of the obvious solution, just making the bus bigger, which, trust me, was a huge and controversial debate, a bunch of developers came up with something way more subtle. And honestly, it was ingenious. And that was the proposal for SegWit.
So what is segregated witness? Let's just break down the name. Segregated just means to separate something. Easy enough. And the witness, that's just the geeky term for your digital signature, the thing that proves you actually own the Bitcoin you're trying to send. So all SegWit really does is it separates the signature data from the rest of the transaction. Okay, so how does separating this signature data actually work? And why is it such a game changer? This is really the heart of the whole upgrade.
Right. Just so we're all on the same page, when we say witness data, we're just talking about that cryptographic proof. It's your digital fingerprint, your signature. And it turns out this signature data, well, it was taking up a ton of room in that very, very limited 1 megabyte block space. And here is the magic trick. Before SegWit,
You had all the transaction info, who's sending what to whom, and that big, bulky signature, all crammed together inside that 1 megabyte block. What SegWit did was so clever. It took that witness data, the signature, and just moved it outside of the main block. It's still attached, kind of like in a sidecar, but it's not taking up room on the main bus anymore. And the result of this simple move? Absolutely brilliant. Because by moving those signatures, all the space they used to take up inside that 1 megabyte limit was suddenly free. And free for what? For more transactions. The basic 1 megabyte rule wasn't even broken, but the effective space, the amount of transactions you could actually fit in a block, almost doubled. And more transactions per block means less congestion and, yep, you guessed it, much lower fees. But wait, the story gets even better. This little bit of housekeeping, just cleaning up how transactions were structured, had this huge positive side effect. It ended up fixing a really nasty, long-standing bug in Bitcoin's code. This bug was known as transaction malleability. Sounds complicated, but here's the gist. See, before SegWit, a transaction's unique ID, its fingerprint, was created using all the data, and that included the signature. Now here's the problem. It was possible for someone to slightly tweak that signature without making the transaction invalid. But if you change the signature, you change the transaction ID. So you could literally change the ID of a transaction while it was waiting to be confirmed. You can imagine how that created a whole host of problems.
So this is the really crucial part. Since SegWit moved the signature out of the main data used to create the ID, that ID was no longer based on a part that could be changed. Suddenly, every single transaction ID was fixed. It was permanent from the second it was created. This was a huge deal.
So let's look at how this one single change ended up being this massive foundational upgrade for Bitcoin's future. It basically unlocked potential that people only dreamed of before. This timeline really lays it all out. For years, the community argued about how to solve this scaling problem. Then, on August 23, 2017, it happened. SegWit was activated. And today, it's not just some patch or a workaround. It is a critical, fundamental piece of Bitcoin's infrastructure. So you can see this amazing domino effect it created. Step 1, SegWit opens up more space in the block. That leads to Step 2, lower fees for everyone. At the exact same time, Step 3, transaction malleability gets fixed. And that stable, reliable foundation, that was the key that unlocked the door for all sorts of amazing new technologies to be built on top of Bitcoin. And that right there is really the final crucial piece of the puzzle. Without getting rid of that malleability bug, things like the Lightning Network, which lets you make almost instant, nearly free Bitcoin payments, they just couldn't exist. It would be impossible to build them securely. So you see, SegWit was never just about cramming more transactions into a block. It was about future-proofing Bitcoin. And all this kind of leaves us with a final, bigger question to think about. SegWit wasn't a total teardown and rebuild of Bitcoin. Not at all. It was this elegant, surgical fix. It kept the core system intact, but massively expanded what it could do. It really makes you wonder, as all our technology gets more and more complex, what's the better path forward? These clever, elegant fixes to the systems we already have? Or is it sometimes better to just rip everything out, start from scratch? Something to chew on. Thanks for tuning in.
Back in Bitcoin's early days, a really strange bug haunted the network. It was like a ghost in the machine, something that allowed for actual theft and could jam up the entire system. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on this bug and dive into the brilliant solution that didn't just fix it, but ended up changing Bitcoin forever.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll expose that hidden flaw and really break down why it was so dangerous. Then, we'll get into the clever fix they came up with, called SegWit, explore its incredible and unexpected side effects, and finally, talk about what this all means for Bitcoin's future.
All right, so what exactly was this ghost in the machine? Well, imagine you send a Bitcoin transaction and then someone else is able to create a perfect clone of it, but with a different ID. It would cause total chaos, right? For early Bitcoin exchanges and users, this wasn't just a scary thought. It was a real and very frustrating problem.
So what was this flaw? I mean, how could someone possibly change a transaction's identity without ever touching the most important details? Like who sent the money and who was supposed to get it? It seems impossible. And this was the exact puzzle that had the entire community really worried.
Well, the culprit has a name: transaction malleability. Now, it sounds super technical, I know, but the core idea is actually pretty straightforward. But don't let that fool you, because the consequences of this little flaw were incredibly serious. Okay, let's really dig into this malleability problem. You're about to see how a tiny, almost meaningless change in the code could be turned into a weapon to cause massive trouble for the entire network.
So formally, transaction malleability is this weird quirk in the system. It meant that a transaction's unique ID, you can think of it like a digital fingerprint, could actually be altered after the transaction was sent. Now, this is super important. This didn't let anyone change the sender, the receiver, or the amount. The payment itself was still secure. The vulnerability, the weak spot, was in the signature data.
And what made this so scary was just how simple the trick was. Think of it like this. In computer code, the number 5 and 05 can mean the exact same thing. But to the hashing algorithm, that's the thing that creates the unique transaction ID, they look completely different. So an attacker could make a tiny, technically valid change like this to the signature, and poof, a brand new, totally valid transaction with a completely different ID was created for the very same payment.
So this wasn't just a theoretical issue. This caused real problems. First off, just massive confusion. You've got two valid IDs for the same payment. Which one is the real one? Even worse, it was used for theft. An attacker could withdraw from an exchange, change the transaction ID, and then claim the withdrawal never happened, tricking the exchange's automated system into paying them out a second time. And on top of all that, it was used to just jam the network with duplicate transactions.
Okay, so things were looking pretty bad. The community absolutely needed a fix. And thankfully, what the developers came up with wasn't just some quick band-aid. It was a really elegant, powerful upgrade that would lay the groundwork for a much better system.
And that solution was called SegWit. It's short for segregated witness. And honestly, the name gives the whole game away. The core idea was to segregate, to separate the part of the transaction that was causing all the trouble in the first place. So before this fix, every transaction was basically one big chunk of data. You had the important stuff, who's paying who and how much, all bundled together with the digital signature. That signature is also called the witness data. Because it was all one package, if you messed with the witness, you changed the ID for the entire bundle.
SegWit solved this beautifully. It just took the signature data and moved it out of the main transaction block, putting it into its own separate structure. With that simple change, the transaction ID was now calculated only from the core data: sender, receiver, amount. The signature, the part that could be messed with, was no longer part of that fingerprint. Problem solved.
The key insight behind all of this is just so clever. A signature is really just a key to get into the blockchain. It gets checked once at the door to make sure everything's valid. After that, it's just taking up space. It's like a cash check. Once it's cleared, you don't need to carry the physical check around forever. Its job is done.
But okay, this is where the story gets really fascinating. Because while fixing malleability was the main goal, separating out that witness data accidentally unlocked a wave of incredible new benefits that maybe no one even saw coming.
And here's the first surprise. It turns out digital signatures are huge. They take up a ton of data. For many transactions, that signature data, that cash check we were just talking about, was taking up as much as 75% of the total space. It was basically dead weight being stored on the blockchain forever.
So you can see where this is going, right? By moving all that bulky signature data out of the main block, SegWit suddenly freed up a massive amount of room. More room means you can fit more transactions into each block. It directly increased the network's capacity and efficiency, a huge and sort of accidental scaling upgrade.
But the capacity boost wasn't even the cleverest part. SegWit introduced what one of our sources calls a fascinating trick. It created a brand new, forward-compatible way to upgrade Bitcoin's programming language without ever having to break the whole network.
This trick is called script versioning. SegWit added a version number to transaction scripts. So now, when a new upgrade is introduced, old clients on the network see this new transaction with a new version number. They don't understand the new rules, but they're programmed to just say, okay, I don't get it, but it looks valid to me. This cleverly avoids a hard fork, which is a messy network split, and it creates a safe path for all kinds of future innovation.
So let's bring it all together. What started as a fix for a single annoying bug became one of the most significant upgrades in Bitcoin's entire history, really paving the way for a more robust and innovative future.
I mean, SegWit was a masterstroke. It solved the dangerous transaction malleability bug, it gave an immediate boost to how many transactions could fit in a block, and it created that safe pathway for future upgrades. All in all, it made the entire Bitcoin network more secure, more efficient, and way more adaptable.
This all leaves us with one final thought. The solution to one problem ended up unlocking all this potential no one had fully anticipated. It just makes you wonder, as Bitcoin continues to evolve, what will the next fascinating trick be that pushes the network forward in ways we can't even imagine today?
You know, in the crypto world, there's no CEO who can just push out a software update. So how in the world does a multi-billion-dollar decentralized network like Bitcoin actually evolve and get better? Well, today we're going to unpack one of the most fundamental concepts in this entire space, the critical difference between a soft fork and a hard fork.
Right, think about it. In a system that's designed to not have a central authority, no single person in charge, how do you fix bugs? How do you add new features? This is the core challenge we're unpacking today, and the answer, well, it reveals a really deep philosophical split about how these networks should be governed.
Well, the answer is what's called a fork. You can kind of picture it like a fork in the road. It's a change to the blockchain's fundamental software rules. But, and this is the key part, these changes come in two very different flavors, with dramatically different consequences for everyone on the network.
And that, right there, brings us to our two main characters for this explainer, the soft fork and the hard fork. Both are ways to upgrade the network, sure, but they represent two totally opposing strategies for getting the job done. Okay, so what really separates a soft fork from a hard fork? It all, and I mean all of it, boils down to just one word: compatibility. If you can grasp this one concept, everything else is going to fall right into place.
And to make this crystal clear, we're going to step away from blockchain for just a second and use an analogy pretty much everyone can relate to: Microsoft Word. Stick with me here, I promise this is going to make everything click.
All right, first up, backward compatibility. This is something you already know, even if you don't use the term. If you have the newest, shiniest version of Microsoft Word today, you can still open up a document that your friend sent you from a version they used back in 1998. The new software understands the old format. Easy enough, right? Okay, now let's flip that idea on its head. This next part is super important for what we're talking about: forward compatibility. Imagine you're still using that ancient version of Word from 1998, and someone sends you a document made with today's version. Your old, clunky software might not know what to do with those fancy new 3D emojis, but the key thing is it still opens the document. It doesn't crash, it just ignores the new stuff it doesn't understand. And that, right there, is the perfect way to think about our two forks. A soft fork is forward compatible. The old software can still work on the newly upgraded network. A hard fork is the total opposite. It is not forward compatible. It's like your old software throwing up its hands and just saying, nope, file format not recognized. It just breaks.
So what does this actually mean for the people running the network, the nodes? Well, with a soft fork, if you don't upgrade, you're still in the game. You can still participate. You're just validating a little less information because you can't see the new rules. But in a hard fork, if you're running the old software, you're kicked off the new network, period. You are no longer part of the group.
Okay, so we've got the technical difference down. But that begs the question, right? How does this network with no boss actually decide to make a change in the first place? Well, that comes down to the approval process, and it's another huge point of difference. You see, a soft fork isn't something that developers just push out and say, here you go. Because it's a voluntary, forward-compatible upgrade, it has to gain consensus. And this is typically done through a voting process, where the miners, the ones who build the blockchain, actually vote on it by signaling their support right inside the blocks they create. And there's this really clever modern way to do this, called BIP9. It's a two-step process. Step 1 is feature activation. Once a big majority, say 75% of miners, signal that they're ready, the new feature is basically turned on. But the real clincher is step 2. Once you get a super majority, we're talking 95%, then boom, the new rules are enforced for absolutely everyone. This makes sure the whole network eventually gets on the same page. And you know what's really cool about this system? It's often called version bits, and it allows the network to vote on several different upgrades at the same time. Miners can use different little signals in the blocks they create to say yes or no to multiple proposals all at once, which is way, way more efficient than doing them one by one.
Okay, so you have that whole voting process for a soft fork. Now let's look at the hard fork. With a hard fork, forget it. There's no vote. There's no gradual easing into it. The change goes live, and the message couldn't be simpler. Upgrade your software to the new rules, or you are no longer part of this network. It is totally an all-or-nothing deal. So naturally, this leads to the big question, right? Which way is better? And as you might have guessed, the answer isn't just a technical one. It digs deep into the risks and the core philosophies of how these networks should even work.
All right, first things first, let's be super clear here. Any change to a network worth billions of dollars is, incredibly risky. Both soft forks and hard forks can introduce bugs. That's why any proposed change gets put through the ringer for months on what's called a test net. It's basically a clone of the real network where they can try to break things without, actually breaking anything important. The whole community has become extremely cautious.
But having said all that, the general feeling in the community is pretty clear. Soft forks are seen as way less dangerous. Why? Well, because they don't force everyone's hand and split the network in two by kicking old users out. They're seen as a much more cautious, less disruptive way to introduce a change.
And this right here really gets to the heart of the whole debate. The soft fork philosophy is all about being inclusive and taking it slow. It's like saying, hey, let's bring everyone along for the ride, even if some people are a little slower to upgrade. Then you have the hard fork philosophy, which is way more strict, more absolute. It's basically saying, look, progress is what matters. If you don't upgrade, you're holding us back and you should be off the network.
Okay, so let's just do a quick recap and put all the pieces together. On one side, you've got the soft fork. It's forward compatible, so older clients can hang around, it's way less disruptive, and it's all about that inclusive, gradual approach. And on the other side, you've got the hard fork, the complete opposite. It's not compatible, it kicks old clients to the curb, and it represents that high-risk, all-or-nothing philosophy. They really are two fundamentally different visions for the future of a network.
And that's exactly why the choice here isn't just about picking the best line of code. Like one developer put it perfectly, at the end of the day, it's more like a philosophical issue rather than technical. It's really a debate about the soul of the network, how a community with no leader is supposed to govern itself. And that leaves us with one last big question for you to chew on. In this decentralized world, what do you think is more important? Is it the slow and steady path of building consensus, making sure everyone comes along, or is it the fast, sometimes brutal path of pure progress? The answer to that question probably tells you everything you need to know about which side of the fork you'd be on.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a technology that could finally make buying a coffee with Bitcoin as quick as tapping your credit card. So let's break down the Lightning Network.
All right, let's kick things off with a pretty wild idea. Forget getting paid monthly or even daily. What if you got paid for every single second you were on the clock?
Yeah, just imagine pulling up your payslip online and literally watching the numbers climb in real time as you earn. You wouldn't have to wait until payday to get the money you've already worked for.
Now, this might sound like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's not. This is the huge promise behind the Lightning Network, a system designed to handle millions, maybe even billions, of transactions a second, all securely recorded.
Okay, so to really get why the Lightning Network is such a big deal, we've got to take a step back and look at the fundamental problem it was actually built to solve.
So when you make a standard Bitcoin payment, the process is pretty straightforward. You send your transaction out to the whole network, and then you wait. And why the wait? Well, it's because those transaction confirmations only pop up when a new block is added to the blockchain. And that happens, on average, every 10 minutes. If you're just trying to buy a cup of coffee, that is a long time to be standing at the counter.
So yeah, this really highlights the two big roadblocks for the main Bitcoin network. First, those super slow confirmation times we just talked about, and second, you've got transaction fees, which you pretty much have to pay to get the miners to process your payment any faster.
All right, so how in the world do we get around that waiting game and those extra fees? Well, this is exactly where the Lightning Network comes in. It's what's known as a Layer 2 solution.
The absolute best way to picture a Layer 2 solution like this is to think of it like an express lane built right on top of the main Bitcoin highway. It's designed to let all those smaller payments just fly right by.
And that really gets to the heart of it, right? Its core promise is the ability to make instant payments without getting hit with those fees you'd normally pay on the main network. This is the thing that could finally make buying that coffee with Bitcoin actually practical.
Okay, so how does this whole thing actually work under the hood? Well, there's a perfect real-world analogy that makes it all just click. Think about a pub tab.
Right. Just picture this. You're out at the pub with your friends, and you're planning on being there for a while.
Now, instead of swiping your card for every single drink, which would mean a separate, annoying transaction fee every single time, what do? You open a tab. You can order as many drinks as you want, and then you just pay once at the very end. Simple. One big transaction, one single fee.
Believe it or not, the Lightning Network runs on the exact same principle. You and another person open up what's called a payment channel. Inside that channel, you can send Bitcoin back and forth instantly, as many times as you want. And then, when you're all done, you just close the channel, which settles the final score in one single transaction on the main blockchain.
And this is the absolute key. All those little payments bouncing back and forth inside the channel, they happen with basically zero fees. None.
And that's the magic right there. This is what lets you have a massive number of transactions without completely clogging up the main Bitcoin blockchain. You only broadcast the final result to everyone else when you're ready to settle up.
But you knew there was a but coming, right? Like with any really groundbreaking tech, the promise is huge, but it also comes with some pretty big challenges. It's not as simple as just flipping a switch.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't some simple plug-and-play solution. The reality is, it's incredibly complex from a technical standpoint. It needs brand new security rules, and the whole technology is still very much a work in progress.
And you have to remember, the stakes here are incredibly high. We're talking about real money, so even one tiny bug in the code, well, it could lead to catastrophic problems for the people using it.
So all of this leaves us with one big final thought. Even with all the complexity, with all the development that still needs to be done, does the Lightning Network's incredible potential for instant, almost free transactions represent the true next step for digital payments? The answer to that? Well, it could completely redefine how we all use money every single day.